Hello guys, welcome to Pika Fiction. So in this video, we will see what if Ash defeated Sabrina and she bonded her soul to him forever. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, The Echo in the Soul. The air in the saffron gym was thick and cold, heavy with a pressure that had nothing to do with temperature. It coiled in Ash's lungs, a psychic suffocation that made every breath a conscious effort. Sound was a distant, muffled thing, as if the entire world were submerged in oil. Across the gleaming battlefield, Sabrina floated serenely on a black throne, her eyes closed, her expression as placid and unnerving as a frozen lake. On the polished floor below her, her alakazam stood with its spoons held aloft, its own eyes glowing with a malevolent crimson light. It hadn't moved more than a few feet the entire battle, yet it had systematically dismantled 5 of Ash's Pokémon. Charizard's defiant rage had been turned against him, the psychic Pokémon trapping him in an illusion of 100 snarling copies of himself until he'd collapsed from exhaustion. Snorlax had been levitated and spun like a top until vertigo and nausea had done what few physical attacks ever could. Pidgeot had been grounded by a phantom gravity, unable to beat his wings, and picked off with a single, contemptuous Psybeam. Each loss was a clinical, passionless dissection. Now, only Pikachu remained. To Ash's right, near the entrance, stood 2 figures, perfectly still. One was a tall, tanned young man with his arms crossed, an uncharacteristically blank look on his face. The other was a red-headed girl, her hands clenched at her sides, her mouth slightly open in a silent gasp. They looked like perfectly crafted, life-sized dolls. Brock and Misty. They weren't hurt, not physically. Sabrina had made that much clear with a single, chilling thought that had slithered directly into Ash's mind: they are spectators. They will remain unharmed as long as you remain on the field. It was a cage built of concern. A threat made not against him, but against the people he cared for. It was more effective than any physical barrier. Pikachu's voice was a low growl, his body tensed, sparks leaking from the red pouches on his cheeks. He was tired. The psychic pressure was wearing on him, too, a constant, abrasive static against his senses. Ash crouched, his eyes narrowed, ignoring the crushing weight in the air. He wasn't afraid. Fear was a luxury, an indulgence that would get them all trapped in this silent nightmare forever. 2 years on the road had burned the panic out of him, leaving behind a cold, hard core of resolve. He had faced down legendary birds and herds of rampaging toros. He wouldn't be broken by a girl who had forgotten how to feel. That's the key, he thought, the idea solidifying in his mind not as a plan, but as a primal certainty. That's it. He had been fighting Alakazam. He had been trying to outspeed a Pokémon that could teleport, to outthink a creature whose brain was a supercomputer, all while its trainer saw his every move before he even made it. He'd been playing the wrong game. His target wasn't the monster on the field. It was the one on the throne. Done contemplating your inevitable failure? Sabrina's voice echoed in the gym, yet her lips didn't move. It was a sterile, disembodied sound, devoid of inflection. Surrender. It is the most logical outcome. Alakazam's spoons began to hum, the psychic energy around it warping the air into a visible shimmer. A final attack was building. Pikachu, Ash said, his voice low and steady. Forget Alakazam. Look at me. The small yellow Pokémon flicked his ears, his dark eyes locking onto Ash's. The trust there was absolute, a beacon in the suffocating gloom. We can't beat them with speed or power, Ash murmured, his hand hovering just over Pikachu's head. She's in his head, and she's in mine. She sees everything we're going to do. So we're going to do something she can't predict. Something I don't think she's ever felt before. He took a deep, steadying breath, pushing back against the psychic oppression with sheer force of will. He closed his own eyes. He didn't have Sabrina's power. He couldn't move objects with his mind or speak without opening his mouth. But he had something else. A bond forged in thunderstorms and fire, in victory and defeat, in 1,000 miles of dirt roads and crowded cities. Pikachu, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Do you remember the flock of Spearow? That storm? You were hurt, and I was just some dumb kid who didn't know what he was doing. An image bloomed in his mind, sharp and vivid. The sting of rain on his face. The terror, pure and sharp, not for himself, but for the stubborn little creature in his arms. The defiant roar he'd thrown at the sky. Paika. The answering thought from Pikachu wasn't a word, but a feeling. A memory of shared fear, and the first flicker of loyalty. Sabrina flinched on her throne, a barely perceptible twitch. Her eyes, still closed, squeezed tighter. The hum from Alakazam's spoons wavered. It was working. Ash pressed on, opening the floodgates. He didn't just remember, he relived. The warmth of their first campfire outside Viridian City, the smell of Brock's cooking mingling with pine smoke. The sheer, breathtaking view from Pidgeot's back as they soared over the mountains to Pewter. The raucous laughter in the Cerulean gym after a hard-won battle, Misty's insults ringing with affection he hadn't understood at the time. He pushed it all out, not with psychic energy, but with the raw, untamed power of his own heart, using his bond with Pikachu as an amplifier. It was a chaotic, unfiltered torrent of life. The saint and collapsing, he said, his voice cracking. The feeling of the water closing over our heads, and the only thing that mattered was finding you. He projected the panic, the cold, the crushing pressure of the deep, and then, the overwhelming, explosive relief of seeing Pikachu's yellow fur in the dark, his little paws paddling furiously. The joy of that reunion, stark and blinding. A gasp, sharp and audible this time, came from the throne. Sabrina's hands clenched the armrests. The psychic pressure in the room faltered, flickering like a dying bulb. Alakazam stumbled. Its head twitched, its glowing eyes dimming as its master's concentration shattered. It was getting the feedback, the psychic shrapnel of an emotional explosion it was not equipped to handle. The thrill of the race against Ponyta. Ash shouted, now feeding the fire with everything he had. The burn in our legs, the wind in our faces. The pride, Pikachu. The pride of winning, not for a badge, but for a friend. Friendship. Loyalty. Joy. Fear. Anger. Love. It was a tidal wave of pure, chaotic, human emotion, a hurricane of sensation crashing against the sterile walls Sabrina had built around her mind for a lifetime. He poured every memory he had into the assault, the taste of a fresh donut in a crowded city, the sting of a scraped knee, the warmth of his mother's hug, the silent understanding with a Pokémon, the gut-wrenching sorrow of leaving Butterfree behind. It was messy and beautiful and painful and real. Through his bond with Pikachu, the feelings intensified, purified into their rawest form. Pikachu wasn't just a relay, he was a partner, adding his own fierce love for Ash, his own battle joy, his own unwavering loyalty, into the psychic storm. Sabrina screamed. It was not a telepathic cry. It was a raw, human sound torn from her throat, a sound of agony and shock. Her eyes snapped open, wide and staring, but they weren't seeing the gym. They were seeing a life they had never known. A world of connection, of touch, of feeling. Her placid mask was gone, replaced by a look of utter, soul-shattering terror. The psychic pressure in the gym didn't just falter, it imploded. The cold vanished, replaced by a ringing silence. Alakazam cried out, clutching its head, its spoons clattering to the floor. Its link to Sabrina, once a source of unstoppable power, was now a conduit for pure agony. It was crippled. Now, Pikachu. Ash roared, his voice clear and sharp in the suddenly normal air. Thunderbolt. Pikachu leaped, a golden blur of pent-up energy. Pikachu. The bolt of lightning that erupted from him was immense, brighter and fiercer than any he had summoned before. It wasn't just electricity, it was a physical manifestation of their shared defiance. It slammed into the stunned Alakazam, lifting the psychic Pokémon off its feet and throwing it backward into the wall with a deafening crash. Alakazam slid to the floor, unconscious, spirals in its eyes. Silence. Then, a slow, creaking sound. Sabrina was leaning forward on her throne, her body trembling violently. A single tear traced a path down her pale cheek. Then another. She looked at Ash, her dark eyes filled with a terrifying mix of awe, horror, and a desperate, agonizing yearning. She saw the boy who had just torn her soul open. She saw the connections he held, the life he lived. And in that moment, she felt the crushing, absolute void of her own existence. The silence. The cold. The loneliness that was her entire world. She was falling. Not just metaphorically. As her last ounce of conscious control vanished, the psychic energy holding her throne aloft dissipated. She tipped forward, spilling from the chair toward the hard floor, a fragile doll in a black dress. Her power, however, was not gone. It was primal, lashing out in a final, instinctual act of self-preservation. It wasn't a thought. It was a need. A desperate, silent scream from the core of her being, reaching for the only source of warmth, the only point of connection it had ever known. Don't leave me alone again. Ash saw a flicker of purple light in her eyes. Then the world became that light. It exploded from her, a wave of pure psychic force that wasn't an attack, but a grasp. It slammed into him, not with malice, but with the force of a drowning person clinging to a lifeline. He felt a sensation like being torn in two, a scream lodging in his throat as his very essence, his soul, was pulled and stretched. He felt another presence, cold, terrified, and overwhelmingly powerful, slamming into his own. It wasn't a merger. It was a collision. A frantic, desperate fusion. His memories, his feelings, his very being tangled with hers in a violent, chaotic knot. He felt her lifelong isolation, a cold that seeped into his bones. He felt her terror of her own power. And she, in turn, was drowned in his world, in the warmth of his connections, the fire of his will. The purple light contracted, pulling them both into its epicenter, and then vanished, leaving behind a silence more profound than any that had come before. A low groan escaped Ash's lips. The first thing he registered was the cold, smooth floor against his cheek. The second was a throbbing, searing headache that felt like a nail being hammered between his eyes. He pushed himself up, his arms shaking. The gym was normal. The oppressive atmosphere was gone. Pikachu was trotting over to him, nudging his hand with his head, his ears drooped with concern. "I'm okay, buddy," Ash mumbled, rubbing his temples. "Just, wow." Then he saw them. Brock and Misty were rushing toward him, their faces etched with worry. "Ash. Are you alright?" Misty cried, grabbing his arm. "1 minute we were watching, and the next, it was like we woke up from a trance." "What happened?" "You were dolls," Ash said, his voice distant. He looked past them, his gaze landing on the spot where the throne had been. Sabrina lay on the floor, curled in on herself, unconscious. Her father, a tall, severe-looking man in a black suit who had been observing from the shadows, was striding toward her, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't look at his daughter with concern, he looked at her like a broken tool. "You," he snapped, his finger pointing at Ash. "What did you do to her? Her psychic output is in chaos." Before Ash could answer, a small, floating orb of light materialized beside Sabrina's father. It was the Marsh badge. "The battle is concluded," the man said, his voice dripping with disdain. "The challenger was the last one standing. Take your badge and leave Saffron City. You are not welcome here." Brock stepped forward, his expression grim. "She needs a Pokemon Center, not a lecture. She's hurt. Her condition is a private family matter," her father retorted, gesturing to two men in identical black suits who emerged from the doorway. They moved to lift Sabrina, their movements efficient and impersonal. Ash watched them, a strange sense of unease creeping over him. He felt disconnected. Wrong. He took a step, and a sharp pain lanced through his skull, so intense it made him stagger. But it wasn't just pain. It came with a phantom sensation, the feeling of being lifted, the texture of a coarse suit sleeve against his own skin. He gasped, clutching his head, his eyes squeezed shut. Cold. So cold. Where am I? The thought whispered through his mind, as clear as his own, but it wasn't his voice. It was faint, terrified, and distinctly female. His eyes snapped open. He looked at Sabrina's unconscious form being carried from the gym. The men were handling her like a sack of potatoes, their grips rough. He felt a phantom pang of pain in his own arm where one of the men was gripping her. "Wait," Ash said, his voice coming out stronger than he expected. Sabrina's father turned, his patience clearly gone. "I told you to leave." Ash ignored him. His gaze was locked on Sabrina. He took another step forward, the headache flaring, the foreign sensations growing stronger. He could feel the gentle sway of her body as her attendants carried her. He could almost feel the cold dread that was radiating from her unconscious mind. It was an echo, a psychic resonance that was tied directly to him. He looked down at the marsh badge in his hand, its golden surface gleaming under the gym lights. He had won. He had proven his point. He had broken through her walls and shown her that there was another way. But as they carried her out of the gym and the distance between them grew, a new sensation washed over him, a tearing, agonizing feeling of being stretched thin, like a rope pulled taut to its breaking point. And with it, that same silent, terrified thought echoed in the deepest part of his soul, no longer a whisper, but a desperate, frantic plea. "Don't leave me." Ash stared at the empty doorway through which she had vanished, the badge suddenly feeling impossibly heavy in his hand. The victory was hollow. The prize was meaningless. He had won the battle, but in the process, he had become chained to his opponent in a way he couldn't begin to understand. A part of her was now inside him, an echo in his soul, and it was screaming in the dark. Chapter 2, Two Minds, One Path. The Pokémon Center smelled of antiseptic and quiet desperation. Ash sat on a stiff chair in the waiting area, pushing lukewarm noodles around a bowl with a fork. He hadn't eaten a bite. It wasn't that he wasn't hungry, his stomach was a hollow pit. But every time he lifted the fork to his mouth, the taste that filled his senses was of weak, bitter tea. The scratchy feel of a wool blanket prickled his arms, even though he was only wearing his jacket. "You've been staring at that bowl for 10 minutes, Misty said, sliding into the chair opposite him. Brock stood behind her, his arms crossed, a worried frown creasing his brow. "If you don't eat it, I will." "I'm not hungry," Ash mumbled, dropping the fork with a clatter. His head was still throbbing, a dull, persistent ache that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. It was more than just the aftermath of the psychic explosion. It was a low-level static, a constant awareness of something else humming just beneath the surface of his own thoughts. "You have to be," Brock said, his voice gentle. "You pushed yourself to the limit in that battle. And whatever happened at the end, that wasn't normal, Ash. You were out cold for almost an hour." Ash ran a hand through his messy black hair. How could he explain it? That he could feel the starched sheets of a bed he wasn't in. That he could sense a deep, shivering anxiety that wasn't his own, emanating from a room down the hall. Before he could try, Nurse Joy approached their table, her expression professionally placid but her eyes betraying a hint of unease. "Excuse me, Ash. Your friend is awake now. The one who was brought in from the Saffron Gym." Ash's stomach clenched. The moment Nurse Joy said the words, the dull ache in his head sharpened into a spike of ice. The anxiety he'd been sensing flared into raw panic. A wave of dizziness washed over him, and the waiting room tilted violently. Images, not his own, flashed behind his eyes, a white ceiling, the concerned face of a Chansey, a window showing a sliver of darkening sky. Where am I? What happened? The battle, the boy. The thoughts were a frantic whisper, slicing through his own consciousness. He gasped, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes. The feeling of the scratchy blanket intensified, and now he felt it around his shoulders, a suffocating weight. The phantom taste of bitter tea was so strong he nearly gagged. It was a feedback loop. His anxiety about her waking had spiked hers, and her resulting panic was now slamming back into him, amplified. Whoa, Ash. Brock's hand was on his shoulder, steadying him. What is it? What's wrong? I have to, Ash gritted his teeth, pushing himself to his feet. The room spun, but a sudden, overwhelming instinct screamed at him. He had to get closer. The distance was poison. I have to see her. The doctors said she needs rest. Nurse Joy began, but Ash was already moving, walking with a stiff, determined gait down the hall. Pikachu, sensing his trainer's distress, leaped from the table and bounded after him. With every step he took toward her room, the spike of pain in his head receded. The dizziness lessened. The phantom sensations faded from a roar to a murmur. It was like tuning a radio, moving from painful static to a clearer, if still unsettling, signal. By the time he reached the door numbered 204, the agony had subsided back into the dull, manageable throb. He pushed the door open without knocking. The room was sterile and white. Sabrina was curled on the bed, facing away from the door, a thin blanket pulled up to her chin. She looked impossibly small, a stark contrast to the divine, intimidating figure who had floated on a throne of psychic power. She was just a girl in a black dress, lost in a bed that was too big for her. She flinched as the door opened, her shoulders tensing. She didn't turn around. Go away, she whispered, her voice rough and weak. Ash closed the door behind him, shutting out Brock and Misty's concerned faces. Pikachu hopped onto the foot of the bed, his ears twitching, watching Sabrina with intelligent, wary eyes. Are you okay? Ash asked. It was a stupid question, but it was the only one he could think of. She finally turned her head, her dark hair spilling across the white pillow. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and haunted. There was no cold detachment left, no serene confidence. All he saw was a raw, bottomless fear. The moment her eyes met his, he felt it again. A wave of her confusion, her terror, her utter disorientation washed over him. And through the connection, she must have felt his resolve, his concern, and the heavy weight of his guilt. You did this to me. The thought was not an accusation. It was a simple, terrified statement of fact, whispered directly into his mind. Ash walked closer to the bed, the psychic noise in his head clarifying as the distance shrank. I know, he said, his voice quiet. I didn't mean for this to happen. I just wanted to get through to you. You had Brock and Misty, you looked so alone up there. Alone is safe. Her thought was sharp, defensive. Alone is quiet. It didn't look quiet. It looked empty, he countered softly. He stopped beside the bed. My head hurts. Does yours? She nodded, a tiny, jerky movement. She slowly sat up, pulling the blanket around her like a shield. I can hear you. Not your voice. Your everything. Your worry for your friends. Your strange fondness for that noodle bowl. It's so loud. I can feel you, too, he admitted, gesturing vaguely. The blanket. When I was in the waiting room, I could feel it on my arms. When your father's men carried you. I felt it. A pain in my arm where they were holding you. Her eyes widened further. The implications of what he was saying began to sink in, painting a picture of their new reality. A horrifying, intimate prison. We have to be close to each other, Ash concluded, the realization landing with the weight of a stone. When I was down the hall, it felt like my head was going to split open. The pain lessens when you're near. Her thought was laced with a new kind of dread. The dread of dependency. She had spent her entire life pushing the world away, and now her only relief from agony was to be near the one person who had shattered her defenses. Before either of them could process the monumental horror of their situation, the door to the room burst open, slamming against the wall with a loud crack. Sabrina's father stood in the doorway, his face a thunderous mask of rage. Behind him were the same two black-suited attendants from the gym, their expressions blank and imposing. They weren't visitors, they were a recovery team. "I told you to leave this city," the man snarled, his eyes locking onto Ash. He then shifted his cold gaze to his daughter. "And you? You will come home now. This complication will be dealt with. Your training will be adjusted to account for this impurity." Sabrina shrank back against the headboard, a visible tremor running through her. Ash felt a corresponding jolt of her terror, sharp and sickening. The word impurity hung in the air, cold and cruel. He wasn't a person to this man, he was a contamination. "She's not going anywhere with you," Ash said, stepping between the bed and the intruders. Pikachu, on the bed behind him, stood up, his cheeks sparking dangerously. "She's hurt. She needs to be here. Her well-being is my concern, not that of a vagrant child," her father retorted. He gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod to his men. "Take her." The two attendants moved forward, their movements swift and practiced. They weren't trainers preparing for a battle, they were soldiers on an objective. One lunged for Sabrina, while the other moved to intercept Ash. Ash reacted on pure instinct, shoving the man who was reaching for him. But the attendant was solid, barely stumbling. He recovered instantly, his hand shooting out to grab Ash's jacket. Left. The thought, the warning, was a piercing shriek in his mind, coming from Sabrina. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a split-second command born of pure precognitive instinct. An image flashed in his head, the attendant's other hand swinging in an arc, not to punch, but to press a small, metallic device against his neck. Ash didn't question it. He dropped, twisting his body to the left, pulling free of the man's grip. The attendant's hand swung through the empty air where his head had just been. The move was so fluid, so immediate, it felt less like a conscious decision and more like a reflex he never knew he had. "Pikachu, the lights!" Ash yelled, pointing at the ceiling fixture. "Pika!" A small, precise bolt of electricity shot from Pikachu's cheek, striking the light panel. The room plunged into darkness, punctuated by the surprised shouts of the attendants. Chaos erupted. In the blackness, Ash felt another flash of insight from Sabrina, not a word but an urgent, directional pull. The window. He didn't hesitate. He spun around, his hands finding Sabrina's arm in the dark. She was trembling, but she didn't resist. "Come on," he urged, pulling her off the bed. "They're blocking the door," one of the men shouted. "Don't let them escape," her father roared. Ash, guided by the phantom sense of Sabrina's awareness, dragged her toward the opposite wall. His free hand found the latch of the window. It was a second-story room, overlooking a narrow alley. Not a great escape route, but the only one they had. "Pikachu, another diversion. Aim for the door," Ash ordered, fumbling with the window lock. Another, brighter flash of light illuminated the room for a split second as Pikachu unleashed a small thunder shock at the metal doorframe, drawing the men's attention. It was the opening they needed. Ash got the window open and shoved it upwards. "We have to jump," he said, his voice low and urgent. He felt her hesitation, a wave of pure terror. It was a long drop. But it was better than being captured. He didn't give her time to think. He scooped one arm under her legs, lifting her in a surprisingly easy motion. She weighed almost nothing. Her gasp was a sharp intake of breath against his ear. He felt a phantom sensation of being lifted, a dizzying moment of vertigo that was hers, not his. "Hang on," he grunted, and threw them both out the window. They landed hard in the alley below, Ash taking the brunt of the impact, his legs jarring up to his teeth. He rolled, keeping Sabrina cradled against his chest to protect her. He scrambled to his feet, pulling her up with him. Her legs were unsteady. "This way," he hissed, grabbing her hand. Her hand was small and cold in his. Pikachu landed neatly beside them a second later, shaking himself off. Shouts echoed from the window above. They didn't have much time. They ran down the dark alley, into the neon-drenched streets of Saffron City. Their linked minds, once a source of confusion and pain, were now their greatest asset. A flicker of foresight from her warned him of a car speeding around a corner. A surge of his determination kept her legs moving when she wanted to collapse. They moved through the crowds, a single entity driven by a shared, desperate need to escape. He was the legs, the strategy, she was the eyes, the early warning system. They didn't stop until the glittering lights of Saffron were a faint glow on the horizon and their lungs burned with the cold night air. The campfire crackled, a tiny island of warmth and light in the encompassing darkness of Route 7. The sounds of the city had been replaced by the gentle chirping of unseen Pokémon. Ash prodded the flames with a stick, his jacket draped over Sabrina's shoulders. Pikachu was curled in his lap, fast asleep. They had been silent for a long time, the reality of their situation settling over them like a shroud. They were fugitives. Alone. Chained together by an accident of psychic warfare. Sabrina was huddled on the other side of the fire, her knees drawn up to her chest. The frenetic energy of the escape had faded, leaving her looking fragile and exhausted. But the terror in her eyes had been replaced by something else, a deep, unsettling stillness. Why? Her voice was the first sound either of them had made in over an hour. It was quiet, raspy, barely more than a breath of air. Ash looked up from the fire. Why what? In the gym, she elaborated, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. Why did you do that? You were losing. Logically, you should have surrendered. But you attacked me. Not my Pokémon. Why? Ash leaned back on his hands, considering the question. He could feel the genuine confusion radiating from her, a lifetime of cold logic clashing with an act of pure emotionality. He gave her the only answer he had. The truth. Because you looked lonely. She flinched as if he'd struck her. Her head snapped up, her dark eyes locking onto his. He felt a jolt of shock from her, so powerful it was like a physical blow. Of all the things she might have expected him to say, that it was a strategy, that he was angry, that he wanted to win at any cost, that simple, empathetic observation had completely disarmed her. I am not lonely, she whispered, but the words were hollow, a reflexive defense her heart wasn't in. The thought that echoed in his mind was far more honest. No one has ever said that to me before. Yes, you are, Ash said, his voice gentle but firm. I felt it. When all my memories hit you. It wasn't the noise that hurt you. It was the contrast. You have all this power, you can hear everyone's thoughts, but you're completely alone inside. That's what I saw. And I just wanted it to stop. Tears welled in her eyes, shimmering in the firelight. She didn't try to hide them. The fortress was gone. There was nothing left to hide behind. My power isolated me, she said, her voice trembling. It started when I was a child. I could hear everyone. Their petty thoughts, their lies, their dislike of the strange little girl who could bend spoons. It was too loud. So I shut it all out. I shut them all out. My father, he encouraged it. He said emotions were a weakness. Connection was a flaw. Power was the only thing that mattered. The story poured out of her, a lifetime of enforced solitude. She was a tool, honed for a single purpose, her humanity filed away like a rough edge. Ash listened, the cold dread he'd felt from her earlier making a terrible, tragic sense. She eventually fell silent, her energy spent. Exhaustion was pulling at the edges of his own consciousness, a deep weariness that went beyond the physical. He could feel her drifting, too. The shared drain of their ordeal was immense. She slumped to the side, her eyes fluttering closed, sleep finally claiming her. Ash watched her for a moment, then settled back, leaning against his pack. The bond was a constant, a low hum in the back of his mind. It was terrifying. But as he looked at her sleeping form, he felt a fierce, unexpected surge of protectiveness. She wasn't just his problem anymore. She was his responsibility. He must have drifted off, because the campfire and the quiet forest melted away, replaced by an utter and absolute nothing. He was floating in a void. There were no stars, no ground, no sky. Just an endless, silent, pitch-black emptiness. A cold unlike any he had ever known seeped into him, a cold that wasn't physical, but existential. It was the cold of absolute zero, the cessation of all things. He wasn't alone. He couldn't see anything, but he could feel a presence. Vast. Ancient. Immeasurably powerful. It was the source of the cold, the source of the silence. It was a consciousness the size of a galaxy, and it was watching him. Then he heard a scream. A purely mental scream of such profound terror that it almost ripped his consciousness apart. Sabrina. He turned in the void and saw her, or a representation of her, a faint, shimmering outline of a girl, curled in on herself. She was flickering, fading, being consumed by the immense silence. The vast presence was focused on her, its attention a palpable weight, pressing down, extinguishing her light. This was it. The source of her lifelong nightmare. The thing she was so afraid of. The silent god. Ash felt her terror as his own. The urge to flee, to dissolve into the nothingness, was overwhelming. But then another feeling rose up to meet it, rage. A hot, defiant anger. This thing, this empty god, was what had twisted her life into a cold prison. It had fed on her isolation. He wouldn't let it have her. He didn't know how, but he moved toward her in the non-space, pushing against the crushing pressure of the void. He didn't have psychic power, not like her. But he had his will. He had his heart. The same thing he'd used in the gym. He reached her flickering form and did the only thing he could think of. He shielded her with his own presence. He imagined wrapping his arms around her, and in the dreamscape, it was so. He didn't try to fight the god. He focused entirely on her, on the bond between them. He pushed his own feelings into her, not the chaotic storm from before, but a steady, deliberate warmth. He thought of Pikachu, of Brock and Misty, of his mom. He projected the feeling of the sun on his face, the satisfaction of a perfectly executed battle strategy, the simple joy of sharing a meal with friends. He poured his life, his connections, his stubborn, indomitable spirit into the link between them, creating a small, defiant bubble of warmth and light in the crushing, silent void. I'm here, he thought, the message directed at her, a pillar in the storm. You're not alone. I've got you. The vast presence seemed to recoil. The cold lessened. The connection, their bond, was like a fire that the silence could not extinguish. It was anathema to the void. The pressure receded, not defeated, but repelled, as if touching their shared light was painful to it. The void shattered. Ash gasped, his eyes snapping open. He was back on Route 7. The fire had burned down to embers. The first hint of dawn was painting the eastern sky in shades of gray and lavender. Sabrina was awake, too, sitting bolt upright, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was staring at him, her eyes wide with a new, different kind of shock. The chill of the dream still clung to them both, a cold that had nothing to do with the morning air. You were there, she whispered, her voice trembling. You were in my dream. You saved me. Ash nodded, his heart still hammering against his ribs. I saw it. The thing you're afraid of. They stared at each other across the dying embers of the fire, the shared horror of the nightmare a fresh, terrible secret between them. The bond, the strange psychic chain that had felt like a curse just hours ago, now felt like something else. Entirely. It was their only defense against a threat neither of them could comprehend. They were alone, on the run, and inextricably linked in a battle they had not chosen. The journey for badges, for the Pokémon League, for the life he had known, was over. The journey for survival had just begun. Chapter 3, The Synchronicity Trial. The clue was not a word or a map, but a feeling. It was a faint, melodic hum in the back of Sabrina's mind, a psychic resonance that had been there for years, a whisper she had always ignored. Now, amplified by Ash's presence, the whisper had a direction. It pointed east, across the sea, toward the mountains of Johto. It promised knowledge. It promised answers. They traveled by instinct. Stowing away on a cargo ship leaving Vermilion City was a desperate, hurried affair, hiding in a container full of machine parts, the air thick with the smell of grease and salt. The psychic backlash from the distance was a constant, agonizing thrum, a migraine that never ceased. They huddled close together in the dark, the shared misery their only comfort. Being near each other was the only thing that kept the pain from becoming unbearable. It was in those dark, swaying hours that the last of their barriers crumbled. She would talk, her voice a low murmur in the blackness, telling him of years spent in a single room, her only companions the silent, judgmental thoughts of others. He would listen, and in return, share stories of his own journey, not the grand victories, but the small moments, the taste of a pewter city rock candy, the frustration of teaching Charizard to trust him, the quiet pride in watching his Pokémon grow. When they finally disembarked in Olivine City, blinking in the bright sunlight, they were no longer just two people in a crisis. They were partners, bound by a shared secret and a shared soul. The psychic hum led them inland, away from the bustling port city and into the rugged, pine-choked mountains that clawed at the Johto sky. It was a hard, 2-day climb. Ash, with his years of rough travel, navigated the treacherous paths with an easy confidence, while Sabrina, who had spent most of her life indoors, struggled. He never once complained. He would find the easiest path, offer a steadying hand on a steep incline, and share his water without a word. He could feel her fatigue as if it were his own, a phantom ache in his legs, a shortness of breath in his lungs. This empathy wasn't a choice, it was a fact of their existence now. The monastery was not what Ash had expected. There was no grand temple, no ornate gates. It was a collection of simple, stone and wood buildings clinging to the mountainside, so perfectly integrated into the landscape that they were almost invisible. Prayer flags in faded colors snapped in the sharp mountain wind. The psychic hum was a clear, sonorous chime here, a feeling of deep, ancient peace. They were met at the entrance by a monk with a shaved head and a serene smile. He didn't seem surprised to see them. He simply bowed and led them through a quiet courtyard to the largest of the buildings. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of sandalwood and old parchment. An old woman sat on a simple mat in the center of the room, sipping tea from a small ceramic cup. She was ancient, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, but her eyes were sharp and clear, holding a wisdom that felt as old as the mountains themselves. This was Anya, the monastery's elder. She looked at them as they entered, her gaze lingering on the space between them. She didn't look at Ash, then at Sabrina. She looked at them as a single entity. "The echoes of your arrival have preceded you," she said, her voice a low, melodious rasp. "A soul bond, shattered and reforged in conflict. A synchronicity. It has been many lifetimes since we have seen one." Ash and Sabrina exchanged a look. The name gave their condition a terrifying weight, a sense of history. "Can you help us?" Sabrina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The hope in that question was so potent that Ash felt it as a warmth in his own chest. "Can you separate us?" Anya took a slow sip of her tea, her eyes never leaving them. "Child, what has been woven cannot be so easily unwoven. Your souls are no longer two distinct threads, but one braided cord. To try and tear them apart now would unravel you both completely. The hope in Ash's chest turned to ice. He felt Sabrina's spirit plummet, a sickening drop into despair. He instinctively reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, but she clung to his with a desperate strength. Anya's eyes flicked down to their joined hands, a flicker of something unreadable in her expression. Separation is not the path, the elder continued. Control is. Your bond is volatile. Uncontrolled, your combined psychic and spiritual energy shines like a beacon in the twilight realms. It attracts things. Eaters of thought. Parasites of the soul. The silent god, Ash said, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. Anya's serene expression tightened. So, you have already drawn its gaze. You are in more danger than I thought. You must learn to shield yourselves. To filter. To not just endure the bond, but to wield it. If you do not, it will destroy you. Or he will. And so, their training began. It was nothing like Ash had ever experienced. There were no Pokemon battles, no physical exertion in the traditional sense. Their training ground was a quiet chamber, empty save for 2 meditation mats placed side by side. Their first lesson was simply to exist. You are a chaotic storm of crossed signals, Anya told them on the first day, standing over them as they Saturday. His worry makes her panic. Her fear makes him anxious. You are caught in a feedback loop. You must learn to build walls. Not between each other, but around yourselves. She taught them to meditate, to find the core of their own being. For Ash, it was a familiar place. He found his center in the heat of battle, a state of absolute focus. He just had to learn to access it without a charging Tauros in front of him. He anchored himself in his love for his Pokemon, the solid, unshakable certainty of his own will. For Sabrina, it was a terrifying journey. Her core was a place of cold, silent loneliness. To find it, she had to return to the prison she had just escaped. But this time, she wasn't alone. Ash was there, a constant, warm presence at the edge of her consciousness. He wasn't intrusive, but he was a tether. An anchor. He felt her fear and, through the bond, projected a steady, unwavering calm. I'm here. You're not falling. Days bled into weeks. They learned to filter, to consciously sort through the stream of data flowing between them. He learned to recognize her flashes of precognition for what they were, not as his own gut feelings but as sharp, specific warnings. She learned to parse his emotions, to distinguish his stubborn anger from his fierce loyalty. They built their psychic walls, not to shut each other out, but to have a room of their own within their shared house. For the first time since the gym, Ash could eat a meal and taste only his own food. Sabrina could feel the cold mountain air without the phantom warmth of Ash's jacket. The relief was immense. The intimacy of their training was unlike anything else. They spent nearly every waking moment together, their minds intertwined. He learned about the little girl who loved the taste of sweet berries but was told such pleasures were a distraction. She learned about the boy who cried for a week when he thought he had lost his mother in a crowded market, a memory of pure, childish terror he'd never shared with anyone. One evening, after a grueling session on psychic shielding, they sat on a balcony overlooking the valley, the setting sun painting the clouds in hues of orange and purple. I've never seen a sunset like this, Sabrina said, her voice soft with wonder. From my room in Saffron, all I could see was the building across the street. There was this one time, on Cinnabar Island, Ash began, leaning on the railing. The volcano was smoking, and the ash in the air made the sunset blood red. It was beautiful and kind of scary at the same time. Pidgeot and I just sat on a cliff and watched it for an hour. He shared the memory, not through the chaotic, forced projection of the gym battle, but gently, a deliberate offering through their now controlled bond. He gave her the feeling of the sea spray on his face, the immense pride in his powerful bird Pokemon, the quiet awe of the moment. She gasped softly, her eyes wide. It's beautiful. The thought was a whisper of pure, unadulterated joy. She responded in kind, sharing a memory of her own, a rare, secret one. She showed him the feeling of successfully levitating her favorite doll for the first time, not as a display of power for her father, but as a secret game in the dead of night. The pure, childish delight of it, a flicker of warmth in a cold childhood. He felt her joy, and he smiled. A real, genuine smile. And for the first time since he had met her, Sabrina smiled back. It was a small, hesitant thing, but it reached her eyes, transforming her face. In that moment, she wasn't a terrifying psychic or a broken victim. She was just a young woman seeing a sunset as if for the first time. The second phase of their training was about control. Synchronization. Anya led them to a different chamber, this one dominated by a large, hulking figure in the center. It was a golem, crafted from rock and bound by psychic runes. It stood 8 feet tall, inert and silent. Your bond is not merely a defense. It is a weapon, Anya stated. You, boy, have a brilliant tactical mind, a warrior's spirit. You see the flow of battle with a clarity few can match. And you, child, possess raw psychic power that could level this mountain. Apart, you are formidable. Together, you are something else entirely. The goal was simple, defeat the golem. Their first attempt was a disaster. Ash called out a command to Pikachu, who was watching from the sidelines. Pikachu, quick attack, aim for its legs. At the same time, Sabrina tried to use her telekinesis to lift one of the golem's arms. The conflicting intentions sent a jolt of psychic static between them. Ash stumbled, clutching his head, while Sabrina cried out, her concentration shattering. The golem, animated by Anya's power, took a slow, ponderous step forward and swung a massive stone fist, forcing them to scramble apart. You are 2 drivers fighting for 1 wheel, Anya's voice chided from the edge of the room. You are not thinking as one. You are not acting as one. He makes a plan, she must see it. She feels an opportunity, he must seize it. Do not speak. Do not think in words. Share. They tried again. And again. It was brutally difficult. Ash's mind worked in vectors, speeds, and timings. Sabrina's was a world of abstract forces and probabilities. Their mental languages were completely different. Failure meant a jolt of psychic feedback and, more often than not, dodging a fist the size of a boulder. The breakthrough came from Ash. He stopped thinking of it as a Pokemon battle. He stopped trying to issue commands. Instead, he visualized the outcome. He saw the golem off balance, its left leg sweeping out from under it. He didn't just see it, he felt the intent to make it happen, a pure, strategic desire. Sabrina, sensing not a command but a clear, visual goal, reacted instantly. Her telekinetic power surged, not as a blunt instrument, but as a precise, invisible hand, hooking behind the golem's ankle and pulling. The golem staggered, its legs sweeping out exactly as Ash had pictured. Now. The thought was a shared, singular impulse. Pikachu. Ash yelled, the verbal command just a confirmation of the shared intent. Pikachu, who had been watching them with an almost unnerving intelligence, was already moving. He shot forward, a yellow streak, and slammed into the golem's unbalanced knee with an iron tail, his tail glowing with metallic light. There was a crack of stone, and the golem crashed to the floor. They had done it. They had acted as one. The feeling was exhilarating. A heady rush of shared victory and perfectly synchronized power. From there, their progress was rapid. Ash would see an opening, and Sabrina's power would be there to create it. She would sense a flicker of movement, a precognitive flash of the golem's next attack, and Ash would already be moving, pulling her with him, his body reacting to a threat before it even materialized. It was a dance. Ash's decisive, grounded movements and Sabrina's fluid, ethereal power. He would lure the golem into a clumsy swing, and she would telekinetically hold the fist for a split second, leaving its torso exposed. Ash would project the image of Pikachu striking that spot, and a telekinetic shove from Sabrina would give Pikachu the extra momentum to hit harder and faster. It was a seamless blend of strategy and power, physical and psychic, a fighting style that had never existed before. Their final trial came a week later. Anya stood before the golem, which was now repaired and covered in fresh runes. "Today, you will not just defeat it," she said. "You will become one." The final step of synchronicity. Do not hold back. Do not maintain your walls. For one moment, let the bond be absolute. Let two minds become one. The thought was terrifying. To willingly lower the shields they had worked so hard to build. To let go completely. Ash looked at Sabrina. He saw his own fear reflected in her eyes. But he also saw trust. He gave a sharp, confident nod. She returned it. The golem activated, its stone eyes glowing with a fierce red light. It was faster this time, more aggressive. It charged, its fists swinging. Ash and Sabrina closed their eyes. They took a breath together. And they let go. The world exploded. There was no Ash or Sabrina. There was only us. He saw the world through her eyes, a tapestry of psychic energies, probabilities branching like lightning. He saw the golem not as a rock monster, but as a vessel of controlled energy, its attack patterns a predictable algorithm. She saw the world through his eyes, a physical space of angles, momentum, and opportunities. She felt the solid ground beneath his feet, the coiled strength in his legs, the unshakable confidence that burned at his core. Their minds, their souls, their very essences merged into a single, transcendent consciousness. Left feint. Draw attack. The thought was his strategy. Weak point in the right shoulder joint. A 97% probability of fracture. The thought was her analysis. Their bodies moved as one. They didn't need to dodge the golem's fist. They already knew its exact trajectory. They flowed around it, a single, graceful movement. Ash's hand shot out, not to strike, but to guide. It was a feint, drawing the golem's attention. Simultaneously, Sabrina's power, focused by Ash's tactical mind, became a psychic scalpel. It didn't shove or lift. It concentrated on a single, infinitesimal point in the golem's stone shoulder. Pikachu. Now. The thought was a singular, unified command. Pikachu leaped. He didn't need a vocal order. He was connected to them, to their unified will. His iron tail, glowing like a miniature sun, struck the exact point of psychic pressure. The golem's entire right arm didn't just break. It disintegrated into a cloud of dust and pebbles. The golem froze, its programming unable to compute the damage. The unified consciousness of Ash and Sabrina saw the final move. It was elegant. Simple. Absolute. Core. Shatter. A wave of purple energy, impossibly dense and focused, erupted from Sabrina. But it was shaped by Ash's will, not a wave but a needle. It bypassed the golem's physical form entirely and struck the central rune carved into its chest. The red light in the golem's eyes flickered and died. The great stone figure crumbled, collapsing into a heap of rubble and sand. The unity shattered. Ash and Sabrina gasped, stumbling apart, their minds crashing back into their own bodies. The experience was dizzying, like waking from the most vivid dream imaginable. The sheer power, the absolute clarity, the feeling of complete and total unity, it was the most intoxicating and terrifying thing either of them had ever felt. Ash's heart was hammering. He looked at Sabrina. She was breathing heavily, her face flushed, her eyes alight with a fire he had never seen before. They had done it. Anya walked toward them from the shadows, a rare, genuine smile on her ancient face. The synchronicity is complete. You are no longer two souls trapped in a cage. You are one will, with two bodies. She declared their training finished. They had the tools they needed to survive, to control the beacon that their bond created. But she gave them one final warning as they prepared to leave, her smile fading. You have achieved a power few have ever dreamed of. This control will shield you from the lesser parasites of the astral plane. But it will not hide you from the greater powers. The silent God knows you now. It knows you are not just a source of food, but a threat. An anomaly. It will not send nightmares anymore. It will send its faithful. They left the monastery the next morning, descending the mountain path under a clear, bright sky. The world felt different. Sharper. The psychic hum in Ash's mind was no longer a distracting noise. It was a quiet, constant presence, a familiar warmth. He could feel Sabrina walking beside him, her calm determination a comforting echo of his own. They were no longer an accident. They were a partnership. They were a weapon. As they reached the bottom of the mountain and looked out at the road stretching toward the heart of Giotto, they didn't know what lay ahead. But they knew they would face it together. Chapter 4, The Zealot's Gospel. A critique city was a city caught between ages. Modern storefronts and bustling Pokemon centers stood in the shadow of ancient, towering pagodas, their tiered roofs reaching for the sky like supplicants' hands. The air itself felt different here, heavy with history and a palpable spiritual energy that resonated with the newly controlled bond between Ash and Sabrina. It was a low, pleasant thrum against their minds, a stark contrast to the chaotic noise of Saffron or the oppressive silence of the void. They had been drawn here by that energy, hoping to find a place to rest and plan their next move. The world believed they were dangerous fugitives, thanks to Sabrina's father. For now, their anonymity was their greatest shield. They moved through the streets, Ash's cap pulled low, Sabrina's features softened by the simple act of a genuine, relaxed expression she now sometimes wore. She looked at the world with a quiet curiosity, seeing things as if for the first time. The bright colors of kimonos in a shop window, the smell of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor, the sound of a child's laughter. Through the bond, Ash felt her gentle wonder, and it made him see his own well-traveled world with new eyes. They found themselves in the gardens surrounding the bell tower, a place of serene beauty. An old man was feeding a flock of pidgey, and the quiet cooing of the birds was the only sound. Ash and Sabrina sat on a wooden bench, watching the last rays of the sun set behind the tin tower. Pikachu was dozing in Ash's lap, his tail occasionally twitching. "It's peaceful here," Sabrina said, her voice a soft murmur. The thought behind the words was clearer, I never knew a place could feel like this. So full, but so calm. Ash nodded, feeling a sense of contentment settle over him. Their time at the monastery had forged them into something new, and here, for the first time, they could simply be. There was no pain, no psychic feedback, just a quiet, constant awareness of each other. It was becoming their new normal. "We need a plan," he said, his practical nature surfacing. "Hiding can't last forever. Your father won't stop looking for you. And that thing. Anya warned us about its followers." "I know." Her mental voice was somber. "But where do we even start? We don't know who they are, or what they want." "They want you," Ash stated bluntly. "And they want what we have. That's a start." Their quiet strategy session was cut short by the arrival of a third party. A young man, perhaps a year or two older than Sabrina, approached their bench. He had pale, silver hair that fell across one eye, and he was dressed in an impeccably tailored dark purple suit that seemed out of place among the traditional robes and tourist wear of a critique. He moved with a liquid grace, his steps making no sound on the gravel path. What set Ash on immediate alert was not his appearance, but the feeling that accompanied him. It was a ripple in the psychic calm of the gardens, a sharp, focused point of power that felt unnervingly familiar. It was like the cold of the void, but with a fanatical heat burning at its core. The man stopped a few feet from their bench. He wasn't looking at Ash. His gaze was fixed solely on Sabrina, his expression one of intense, reverent awe. "I knew it," the young man said, his voice smooth and cultured. "The energy I felt. Distorted. Chained. But unmistakably divine. It's you. I have been searching for you for a very long time." Sabrina stiffened, the calm shattering. Ash felt a jolt of her alarm, and his hand instinctively went to the poke ball on his belt. Pikachu sat up, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "We don't know you," Ash said, his voice level and cold. He stood up, placing himself slightly in front of Sabrina. A simple, protective gesture. The man's eyes finally flickered to Ash, and his reverent expression soured into one of profound disappointment, almost disgust. "And you must be the contamination," he said, the words dripping with disdain. "The crude anchor of flesh and emotion, shackling a goddess to the mud. I can feel your noise polluting her glorious silence." The language was chillingly familiar. Contamination. Impurity. It was her father's ideology, twisted into a fanatical new shape. This was what Anya had warned them about. "My name is Lucian," the man continued, his attention returning to Sabrina, as if Ash were a mildly annoying insect. "Like you, I am blessed. I have heard the gospel of the silent God, and it has granted me a glimpse of the true path. The path of ascension. A path you were destined to walk before you were corrupted." Sabrina stood up, her fear now being tempered by a rising anger that Ash felt as a sharp heat in his own mind. "The silent God is a parasite," she shot back, her voice ringing with a new, hard-won conviction. "It offers nothing but a cold, empty void. It feeds on loneliness. That isn't a gift, it's a cage." Lucian actually laughed, a short, pitying sound. "You sound like him," he said, gesturing dismissively at Ash. "You've been with this creature for so long you've started to think like one. Emotions are not strength, they are distortions. Attachments are not bonds, they are chains. The God offers purity. Absolute clarity. The self, unbound by the chaos of feeling. The self, erased," Ash countered, his eyes narrowed. "We've seen what your God offers. It's nothing. An endless, silent, hungry nothing." Lucian's smile vanished, replaced by a cold fury. "You cannot possibly comprehend. You are not psychic. You are a lesser being, a walking prison. You have no right to speak on matters of the soul." He then turned his full attention back to Sabrina, his expression softening into one of a zealot pleading with a straying deity. "It's not too late. I can help you. I can sever this grotesque attachment. I can guide you back to the path. The God is merciful. It will welcome you back. It will burn away this taint." The threat was clear. He wasn't here to talk. He was here to fix her. "Stay away from her," Ash warned, his hand closing around Pikachu's poke ball, but Lucian just smiled. "I have no interest in a vulgar Pokemon battle," Lucian said. "My argument is not with your pets. It is with your philosophy." With a flick of his wrist, the world warped. The gravel at their feet turned to shimmering, liquid silver. The old man feeding the Pidgey froze mid-motion, a statue of crumbling stone. The Pidgey themselves dissolved into a cloud of black dust that scattered on a non-existent wind. The serene garden vanished, replaced by a perfect, sterile replica. The trees were glass, the sky a flat, painted backdrop. It was an illusion, but it was so powerful, so tangibly real, that Ash felt a wave of vertigo. "This is the gift of the God," Lucian said, spreading his arms wide. "Order. Control. A world remade by will alone. What does your philosophy offer? Mud. Pain. The chaos of a beating heart." Ash felt a flicker of Sabrina's fear, not of Lucian, but of the power he wielded. It was her own potential, twisted into a nightmare. Ash clamped down on that fear, replacing it with his own unshakable resolve. He fed it back to her through the bond. It's just a trick. A bigger, emptier version of your old gym. The thought steadied her. Her shoulders squared. She was not the same girl who had collapsed in the face of his emotional onslaught. My philosophy, she said, her voice clear and strong, offers a sunset. And a friend to watch it with. The simple, profound truth of her statement seemed to strike Lucien like a physical blow. His serene mask cracked, revealing a flash of raw, jealous fury. Then you are both lost. The battle began without a declaration. Lucien didn't send out a Pokémon. He was the Pokémon. The glass trees behind him shattered, the shards flying not outward, but directly at Ash and Sabrina like a volley of daggers. Shield. The thought was a shared, instantaneous command. Sabrina's hands flew up. A barrier of shimmering purple energy erupted in front of them, the glass shards pinging harmlessly against it like rain. But the assault was a diversion. Ash felt the ground beneath his feet turn soft and yielding. It was Lucien, turning the earth to quicksand. Ash didn't have time to think. He reacted, his body already moving thanks to a precognitive flash from Sabrina that showed him sinking. He grabbed her waist, leaped backward, and landed on the solid stone of the bench, the only object in the garden that hadn't been warped. This isn't a battle, it's a temper tantrum, Ash grunted, his eyes scanning their warped surroundings. He's all offense. He's showing off. He's leaving his Pokémon vulnerable. Sabrina's thought was sharp and tactical. Ash followed her mental gaze. Standing beside Lucien, almost forgotten, was a massive Metagross. It hadn't moved. Its 4 brains were likely linked to Lucien's, acting as a psychic amplifier for his reality-bending illusions. It was the power source. You're right, Ash said. If we take out his battery, the lights go out. I'll draw his fire. You go for Metagross. No, Sabrina said, her voice firm. We do it together. Like we trained. A new confidence radiated from her, and Ash felt a surge of pride. She wasn't his ward anymore. She was his partner. All right, he agreed. On my mark. Lucien, enraged by their survival, escalated his attack. The sky, the painted backdrop, cracked like porcelain. From the cracks, tendrils of black energy, the same chilling essence of the void, snaked downward, seeking to ensnare them. You cling to your pathetic connection. Lucien's voice boomed, echoing in the artificial space. I will show you what true isolation is. Now. Ash roared. The plan unfolded in a single, breathtaking moment of synchronized action. Ash didn't run from the tendrils. He ran at them. Pikachu, Volt Tackle. Pikachu shot off the bench, becoming a living missile of crackling golden electricity. He wasn't aiming for Lucien or Metagross. He was aiming for the void tendrils. At the same time, Sabrina's power surged. But she didn't create a shield or a telekinetic blast. She focused on Ash. She wrapped him in a thin, almost invisible layer of telekinetic force. It wouldn't stop a physical attack, but it did something else, it made him faster. Lighter. She was lessening the effects of gravity and wind resistance on him, giving him a burst of unnatural speed. Ash moved like a blur, his feet barely seeming to touch the ground as he sprinted across the garden. The tendrils lashed out, but he was too fast, his movements guided by the split-second precognitive warnings that flickered through their shared mind. Pikachu slammed into the mass of dark energy. Electricity and void stuff collided with a sound like tearing reality. The tendrils recoiled, hissing and dissolving. The diversion had worked. For a split second, Lucien's concentration was on Pikachu, his psychic defenses shifting to contain the unexpected assault. It was the opening they had created. While Ash was drawing fire, Sabrina was not idle. The bulk of her power was not with Ash, but focused on Lucien. She wasn't attacking him physically. She was waging a silent, invisible war. She pushed against his mind, not with a chaotic storm of emotion, but with a focused, disciplined assault, forcing him to divert his own psychic energy to defend his own thoughts. It was a mental duel, a battle of will against will. Lucien grunted, a flicker of pain crossing his face. He had underestimated her. He had expected the broken, isolated girl from Saffron. He was facing a warrior. The combined diversions, Ash's impossible speed, Pikachu's raw power, and Sabrina's mental assault, gave them the 1 second they needed. The left side. Metagross's psychic blind spot. The thought was a perfect fusion of his tactical analysis and her psychic perception. Ash, still moving at an incredible speed thanks to Sabrina's aid, changed direction without breaking stride. He wasn't heading for Lucien. He was heading for Metagross. Lucien saw the move too late. His eyes widened in panic. Metagross, Psyshock. Metagross's eyes glowed, a ball of psychic energy forming in front of it. But Ash was already there. He slid under the forming attack, the energy passing harmlessly over his head. He didn't have a Pokémon out to fight it. He didn't need one. Sabrina, now. Pin it. Sabrina's power, freed from its duel with Lucien as he focused on commanding Metagross, slammed down with the force of a physical blow. Not on Metagross itself, but on the space around it. An immense telekinetic pressure locked the giant Pokémon in place, its limbs straining against an invisible force. It was held for only a heartbeat. But a heartbeat was all Ash needed. He was already in the air, having used the momentum of his slide to launch himself upward. He landed squarely on Metagross's metallic back, his feet finding purchase on the cold steel. Pikachu, to me. Thunderbolt. Pikachu, having disengaged from the dissolving tendrils, bounded across the field. He leaped, and Ash caught him in mid-air, swinging him around. Full power. Right on the cross. Ash roared, pointing at the X on Metagross's face. Pikachu unleashed a torrent of lightning at point-blank range. The thunderbolt, raw and untamed, slammed directly into Metagross's central processing unit. The massive steel Pokémon convulsed, a strangled electronic cry escaping it. Its glowing eyes flickered and died. It crashed to the ground, unconscious, its great weight shaking the illusory garden. The moment Metagross fell, the illusion shattered. The glass trees, the fake sky, the liquid silver ground, it all dissolved like smoke. They were back in the real gardens of Ikrutik, the setting sun casting long shadows. The old man was still feeding the Pidgey, who cooed contentedly, completely unaware of the metaphysical battle that had just taken place. To the outside world, nothing had happened. Lucien was on his knees, gasping for breath. The psychic backlash from his amplifier being taken out and the illusion shattering had been severe. A trickle of blood ran from his nose. He looked up, his expression one of utter, stunned disbelief. He had been defeated. Not by superior power, but by superior strategy. By superior connection. How, he whispered, his voice raspy. Your power, it is refined. Focused. But it is chained to his brute physicality. It is a perversion. No, Sabrina said, walking to stand beside Ash. She looked down at Lucien, not with pity, but with a firm, steady certainty. It's a partnership. Something you and your silent, empty god will never understand. Lucien staggered to his feet, his fanatical certainty cracked but not broken. He looked at them, at their easy proximity, at the way Ash's hand rested protectively on Pikachu's head, at the shared strength that radiated from them. What he saw was not a contamination. It was a bond he could never hope to have. And that truth filled him with a cold, hateful rage. The god has taken notice of you now, he hissed, his voice trembling with fury. It has seen your synergy. It is an abomination. An error that must be corrected. It will not just seek to reclaim you anymore, girl. It will seek to unmake you both. With a final, hateful glare, Lucian was consumed by a swirling vortex of purple shadow. It wasn't a teleport. It was something else, a dimensional fold. A moment later, he was gone, leaving only the scent of ozone and the lingering chill of the void. Ash and Sabrina stood in a quiet garden, the adrenaline of the battle slowly fading. They had won. They had faced one of the faithful and defeated him. But it was a hollow victory. They now had a face for their enemy. They understood the nature of the war they were in. It wasn't just a hunt. It was a crusade. And they, with their unbreakable, perverted bond, were the heretics. Chapter 5, The Aegis Protocol. The hum of the magnet train was a futuristic whisper, a sound of progress and speed. It was a world away from the ancient serenity of a critique city. For Ash and Sabrina, it was a calculated risk. After the confrontation with Lucian, staying in one place was no longer an option. They needed to move, to put distance between themselves and the psychic zealot. Goldenrod City, the sprawling economic heart of Johto, seemed like the perfect place to get lost. A city of millions was the best kind of camouflage. They sat in a quiet passenger car, the rolling hills of the Johto countryside a green blur outside the window. Pikachu was curled on the seat between them, pretending to be asleep but with one ear cocked, ever vigilant. The bond was a calm, steady river flowing between them, a shared consciousness that made conversation unnecessary for long stretches. Ash was watching the other passengers, his eyes constantly scanning, a habit ingrained by years on the road now sharpened by their fugitive status. Sabrina was looking out the window, but Ash knew she wasn't just seeing the landscape. She was sifting through the low-level psychic chatter of the train, filtering for any hint of danger, any thought that felt too sharp, too focused. Anything? Ash projected, the thought clean and precise. Just the usual, she sent back, a touch of dry amusement coloring her mental voice. Someone is worried about a business meeting. A child is desperate for ice cream. A young man is trying to work up the courage to talk to a girl 3 rows up. A small smile touched Ash's lips. It was strange. This constant, intimate connection, once a source of terror and confusion, was now a comfort. It was the simple, profound knowledge that he was not alone. He felt a wave of quiet affection from her in response, a warmth that spread through his chest. They were getting good at this. Not just the fighting, but the living. The peace was shattered without warning. A sudden, high-frequency whine filled the air, a sound that seemed to drill directly into their skulls. It wasn't just a sound, it was a frequency. Ash felt the bond, their calm river, instantly turn into a maelstrom of violent static. The connection between them didn't break, but it was corrupted, filled with a shrieking, agonizing noise. Sabrina cried out, her hands flying to her temples, her face pale with shock and pain. The psychic chatter of the train vanished, replaced by a deafening, white-hot roar in her mind. For Ash, it was like a physical blow. The part of his consciousness that was constantly linked to hers was now a source of pure agony. He gritted his teeth, a low groan escaping his lips as he fought against the sensory assault. Before they could even react, the doors at both ends of the car hissed open simultaneously. The people who entered were not trainers or passengers. They were a squad of 6 individuals, clad in matte black, non-reflective tactical gear. Their faces were obscured by sleek, full-face helmets with dark visors. They held strange, rifle-like devices, not aimed to fire projectiles, but emitting the high-frequency whine from multifaceted emitters at their barrels. They moved with a chilling, practiced efficiency, sealing the car. One of the figures, her movements sharp and authoritative, stepped forward. Her helmet was identical to the others, but she carried herself with an air of command. She raised a hand, and the sonic assault intensified. Sabrina slumped in her seat, her body trembling, her eyes squeezed shut in agony. The sonic dampeners were designed for exactly this, to cripple a powerful psychic, to turn their greatest weapon into their greatest vulnerability. Ash fought through the pain, his tactical mind kicking into overdrive. This wasn't Lucien. This wasn't her father. This was something new. Something organized. Professional. He saw the insignia on their shoulders, a stylized silver shield with a lightning bolt striking its center. Ash Ketchum. Sabrina of Saffron, the commander's voice crackled through an external speaker on her helmet, feminine but digitally altered and devoid of emotion. By the authority of the Pokémon League's internal security charter, you are to stand down and surrender. You are classified as an Omega-level threat. Resistance is not advised. Pokémon League? This didn't make sense. They were supposed to be the good guys. Pikachu, Thunderbolt. Ash snarled, forcing the words through the pain. Pikachu leaped from the seat, his body already crackling with rage and electricity. But as he unleashed the bolt, one of the black-clad soldiers adjusted his weapon. A different kind of energy, a shimmering blue field, projected from the rifle and intercepted the thunderbolt midair. It didn't block it, it absorbed it. The blue field pulsed, and the soldier's pack glowed for a moment. They had energy-leeching technology. They had come prepared for everything. As I said, the commander's voice crackled, resistance is not advised. We have studied you. Two of the soldiers moved forward, their intent clear. They were going to take them. Ash knew, with absolute certainty, that if they were captured by this group, they would be separated. Studied. Dissected. The thought was more terrifying than any battle. He looked at Sabrina. She was fighting, trying to push back against the sonic assault with her own power, but it was like trying to shout in a hurricane. Her face was contorted in pain. He could feel her struggle, a desperate, fading flicker through the static. He had to break their advantage. He had to stop that sound. His eyes darted around the car. The windows. The emergency brake. The soldiers were positioned perfectly, blocking all exits. But they had made one mistake. They were confident. Overconfident. Ash grabbed the edge of the seat, his knuckles white. He pushed a single, desperate thought through the agonizing static, focusing all his will to make it clear. It wasn't a plan. It was a single, explosive image. The floor. He didn't know if she received it. He just had to trust. Then he acted. He didn't attack the soldiers. He dropped to his knees and slammed his fist into the seat, yelling, Pikachu, now. Iron Tail. The window. It was a blatant misdirection. The soldier's attention, for a fraction of a second, flicked toward the window, anticipating an escape attempt. Pikachu, however, ignored the command. He had understood the real message. He spun on his heels and his tail, glowing with a hard, metallic sheen, slammed not into the window, but into the floor of the train car. Simultaneously, through the pain, through the static, Sabrina had understood. She unleashed a single, focused blast of telekinetic force, not a wide wave, but a razor-thin, concussive spike, aimed at the exact same spot on the floor. Pikachu's physical force combined with her psychic one. The reinforced metal floor of the high-speed magnet train buckled, screamed, and then ripped open. The world became a vortex of wind and noise. The sudden, violent depressurization sucked the air from the car. Papers, bags, and loose items became a storm of debris. The soldiers, caught completely by surprise, were thrown off balance. One of them was nearly sucked through the hole before his teammate grabbed him. The sonic dampening field wavered as the soldiers fought for their footing. It was the opening. The agonizing whine in Ash's head lessened for a precious second. Go, he yelled, grabbing Sabrina's arm and pulling her to her feet. She was still reeling, but his touch, his solid, physical presence, grounded her. They didn't go for the doors. They went for the hole. Ash half threw, half pushed Sabrina through the jagged opening in the floor. For a terrifying moment, she was airborne beneath a train moving at over 200 miles per hour. Ash followed a split second later, grabbing onto a piece of the train's undercarriage, the wind tearing at him, the roar deafening. He held on with one hand, his other arm wrapped securely around Sabrina. Below them, the ground was a terrifying, lethal blur. Shots rang out from above. Not bullets, but bolts of the same blue, energy-leaching light. They were trying to disable them, not kill them. "Can you slow us down?" Ash screamed in his mind, hoping the urgency of the thought would pierce the lingering static. He felt her stir, her mind focusing through the haze of pain. A faint purple glow enveloped them. Their breakneck speed didn't lessen, but the crushing wind resistance around them eased. She was creating a telekinetic bubble, a pocket of relative calm in the heart of a hurricane. It was a huge strain, but it was working. They were approaching a bridge, a massive steel trestle spanning a wide, muddy river. The river. On 3. Ash projected. He saw the flicker of her understanding. 1. The bridge was getting closer. He could see the individual rivets. 2. The shouts from the soldiers above were lost in the roar. 3. They let go. They fell, tumbling through the air. For a moment that stretched into eternity, there was only the sky and the wind. Then they hit the water with a violent, bone-jarring impact. The cold was a shock that stole Ash's breath. He held on to Sabrina, his grip like iron, as the current caught them, pulling them under, sweeping them away from the train, from the bridge, from the soldiers who could only watch as their targets vanished beneath the churning brown water. They washed up on a muddy bank miles downstream, bruised, soaked, and freezing. Ash dragged Sabrina, who was barely conscious, further onto the shore, where they collapsed behind a thicket of reeds, hidden from view. Pikachu, who had clung to Ash's jacket the entire time, shook himself violently, sending a spray of water everywhere. The static from the sonic dampeners had faded, but the echo of it remained, a phantom ache in their minds. The bond was weak, frayed, but intact. Ash felt her exhaustion, her pain, a deep weariness that mirrored his own. He tore a strip of cloth from the bottom of his ruined shirt and gently dabbed a cut on her forehead. She flinched, her eyes fluttering open. "Are you?" she started, her voice a hoarse whisper. "We're alive," he finished for her. "That's what matters." He looked back toward the distant bridge, his expression grim. "They knew our names. They called us an Omega-level threat. From the Pokémon League." The betrayal stung more than any physical injury. The League was supposed to be about honor, competition, the bond between trainers and Pokémon. Not Black Ops squads and non-lethal takedowns on public transport. Aegis Division, Sabrina murmured, the name a faint echo she must have plucked from one of the soldiers' minds in the chaos. Aegis, the shield. A shield against what? Us. Ash scoffed, though there was no humor in it. "We haven't done anything." "It's not what we've done," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "It's what we are. The power we used against the golem, the way we fought Lucian. A human and a psychic, acting as a single combat unit. With a Pokémon that anticipates commands before they're given. They don't see a partnership. They see a weapon they don't control." The grim logic of it settled over them. They were an anomaly. An unknown variable. And institutions like the Pokémon League did not tolerate unknown variables. As dusk fell, they made their way cautiously toward the distant lights of Goldenrod City. They were no longer just hiding from a psychic cult, they were being actively hunted by a clandestine branch of the most powerful organization in the world. The city was a sprawling maze of skyscrapers and neon, but it offered no comfort. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every person who looked at them for a second too long sent a jolt of paranoia through them. Their faces were plastered on a news screen in the central plaza. Not their photos, but detailed composite sketches. The story was that they were a pair of dangerous terrorists responsible for the attack on the magnet train, wanted for questioning. Commander Rostova, the woman in the black helmet, had not only defeated them but had turned the entire world against them in a single, masterful stroke. They were trapped. Hunted by forces both mystical and mundane. They found refuge in the city's vast, labyrinthine underground, a network of maintenance tunnels and abandoned subway lines beneath the gleaming metropolis. The air was damp and smelled of rust and decay. It was a miserable, desperate existence. They survived on what little food Ash could scavenge from dumpsters in the dead of night. The bond, in this dark, oppressive place, became their only source of light. They shared memories of sunny days to fight off the cold. They replayed their victory against the golem to bolster their flagging spirits. The romance that had begun to bloom in the monastery's peaceful gardens was now being stress-tested in the filth of Goldenrod's underbelly. It wasn't about sunsets anymore. It was about him finding an uneaten half-sandwich and offering her the first bite, the thought, "You need it more," passing between them. It was about her using a tiny flicker of telekinesis to kill a flickering fluorescent light that was giving him a headache, without him even having to ask. It was a love forged not in poetry, but in shared survival. They were cornered. They had no allies, no resources, and no way out. The Aegis division was sweeping the city, their search patterns methodical and relentless. Ash could feel them getting closer, a tightening net. Their breaking point came in the cavernous, abandoned main hall of the old Goldenrod radio tower, a place they'd broken into seeking a high vantage point. Alarms blared to life the moment they stepped inside. They had been anticipated. Floodlights snapped on, pinning them in the center of the room. Squads of Aegis soldiers rappelled down from the ceiling, weapons raised. Checkmate. Commander Rostova stood on a catwalk above them, her helmet now retracted, revealing the face of a woman in her late 30s with severe, dark hair and eyes as cold and gray as a winter storm. "It's over, Ketchum," she called down, her voice crisp and authoritative. "There is no escape. Surrender, and your Pokémon will be treated humanely." She didn't even mention what would happen to them. Ash stood back to back with Sabrina, Pikachu a low, rumbling ball of fury at their feet. They were surrounded, outgunned, and exhausted. This was it. But as Ash looked at Sabrina, he didn't see despair. He saw a fierce, burning resolve. She wasn't the frightened girl from the Saffron Gym anymore. He felt her intent through the bond, a desperate, brilliant, insane idea. It was a gamble on a scale they had never attempted. "They hear with technology," she projected, her thought a razor's edge in his mind. "But there are some who can listen with their hearts." She was going to use the radio tower. Not to broadcast a sound, but to broadcast a thought. A single, powerful psychic message, amplified by the tower's massive antenna array. A psychic flare, a desperate SOS aimed at the entire world, with no guarantee that anyone capable of receiving it would even be listening. It would drain her completely. It would pinpoint their location to every psychic on the continent, including Lucian. But it was their only move left. "Do it," Ash said, his voice a low growl. He turned to face the closing circle of soldiers, planting his feet. "I'll buy you time." Rostova gave a sharp hand signal. "Take them." The soldiers advanced. Ash met them head-on. He wasn't a master of martial arts, but 2 years of roughing it on the road had made him a scrapper. He moved with a brutal efficiency, using their own momentum against them, his every move amplified by Sabrina's precognitive flashes guiding him around attacks. He couldn't see coming. A soldier lunged, Ash sidestepped and shoved him into another. He was a whirlwind of motion, a desperate defense. Behind him, Sabrina closed her eyes, her hands pressed against the central broadcast console. Ash felt her gather her power, not just her own, but drawing on his will, his fierce determination, his absolute refusal to lose. Their bond became a conduit. He was the battery, she was the weapon. The world went silent. An immense wave of pure, unfiltered psychic energy erupted from her, channeled and amplified by the radio tower. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a picture. It was a feeling. It was the truth. It was the terror of the void. The cold malice of Lucian. The sterile cruelty of the Aegis division. The warmth of the monastery. The fierce, desperate love of two souls bound together against the world. It was a plea, a warning, and a testament, all in one. It shot out from Goldenrod, a psychic shockwave traveling at the speed of thought, screaming into the minds of anyone sensitive enough to hear it. Ash felt Sabrina's consciousness dim, her energy utterly spent. She collapsed against the console, her part in the battle finished. The last thought he received from her before she fell into unconsciousness was a single, clear image. A man in a black suit with a flowing red cape. A dragonite at his side. A champion. Ash fought on, a lone figure against a sea of black-clad soldiers, protecting the unconscious girl behind him, holding on to the slimmest, most insane sliver of hope that somewhere, someone had heard their call. Chapter 6, An Alliance of Dragons. The first soldier to reach Ash carried a stun baton that crackled with blue energy. Ash, guided by a phantom ache in his shoulder, a residual echo of Sabrina's precognition, ducked under the swing. He slammed the heel of his palm into the man's helmeted chin, snapping his head back. He used the man's stumbling momentum to spin him around, putting the soldier between himself and another operative who was leveling an energy rifle. He was a cornered animal, fighting with a ferocity that stunned the highly trained Aegis soldiers. They were accustomed to calculated, sterile engagements. Ash was chaos. He was instinct. He was a trainer who had stared down Gyarados and outsmarted Jengar, and he fought with the same desperate, unpredictable energy. Every punch he threw was fueled by the burning need to protect the girl slumped against the console behind him. But he was just one boy. And he was tiring. They were closing in, their movements becoming more coordinated as they adapted to his ferocity. A blast from an energy rifle caught him in the side, not a piercing bolt but a concussive force that felt like being hit with a sledgehammer. He gasped, stumbling to one knee, the air driven from his lungs. The world swam in a haze of pain. Commander Rostova watched from the catwalk, her expression unreadable. She had not moved, observing the confrontation with the detached air of a scientist studying a specimen. Her forces had him. It was over. Suddenly, the massive glass dome that formed the roof of the radio tower exploded inward. Shards of reinforced glass rained down, scattering the Aegis soldiers, who instinctively shielded their heads. A powerful gust of wind whipped through the chamber, and a colossal shadow fell over them. A roar, not of rage but of pure, indomitable power, shook the very foundations of the tower. A dragonite, immense and magnificent, hovered in the shattered opening, its wings beating with slow, powerful strokes that churned the air. Its orange scales seemed to glow in the floodlights, and its eyes, intelligent and ancient, surveyed the scene below. On its back sat a figure who needed no introduction. His spiky red hair was unmistakable, as was the dramatic black cape that billowed around him. Lance, the champion of the Kanto Elite Four, the Dragon Master. His expression was grim, his gaze sweeping from the surrounded Ash to the unconscious Sabrina, and finally, to Commander Rostova on the catwalk. The Aegis soldiers froze, their weapons half lowered, caught between their objective and the sudden, overwhelming presence of a Pokémon League champion. They were League assets, but Lance was the League's living embodiment of power and authority. It was a conflict of orders they were not equipped to handle. Commander Rostova, Lance's voice boomed, amplified by the acoustics of the hall. It held a dangerous calm, the stillness before a storm. Stand your forces down. Now. Rostova's composure didn't break. She straightened, her hands clasped behind her back. Champion Lance. This is an active Aegis operation. These two are classified Omega-level threats under Internal Security Protocol 7A. I have full authority from the board. Your authority ends where my investigation begins, Lance retorted, his voice dropping, taking on a razor's edge. I received a communication. One that painted a very different picture than the report of terrorist activity that landed on my desk this morning. A report, I might add, that you filed. He slid from Dragonite's back, landing on the catwalk opposite Rostova with a light, soundless grace. Dragonite remained hovering, a silent, powerful guardian in the center of the room. The standoff was no longer between Ash and the soldiers. It was between two of the Pokémon League's most powerful figures. My report is accurate, Rostova said, her voice clipped. They possess a synergistic psychic-physical capability that is unprecedented and unstable. They destroyed a section of the magnet train and evaded capture. They are a danger to public safety. They are children, Lance shot back, taking a step closer. Children, you've been hunting across my region with a Black Ops unit that is supposed to be reserved for existential threats, not rogue trainers. You cornered them, and instead of surrendering, they sent out the most powerful psychic distress call I have ever felt. It was not a message of malice, Commander. It was a scream for help. Ash, still on one knee, watched the exchange, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Hope, fierce and blinding, surged through him. Sabrina's insane gamble had worked. The flare had reached the one person who could change the game. Rostova's jaw tightened. She knew she was losing control of the situation. Their power is a threat. It is my duty to neutralize such threats. Your duty is to protect the people and Pokémon of this world, Lance countered, his voice low and intense. But your methods, they feel personal, Eva. You're not just containing a threat. You're trying to erase an anomaly. There's a difference. The use of her first name seemed to rattle her. For the first time, a flicker of emotion, a cold, sharp anger, crossed her face. But before she could respond, Lance looked past her, down at Ash. Get her, he commanded, his voice softening slightly. Dragonite will take you from here. Ash didn't need to be told twice. He pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the searing pain in his side. He scooped the unconscious Sabrina into his arms. She was limp, a dead weight, her energy utterly spent. Pikachu leaped onto his shoulder, nudging his cheek reassuringly. The Aegis soldiers parted before him, their weapons lowered, their uncertainty palpable as they watched their commander locked in a battle of wills with the champion. Ash carried Sabrina to the center of the room, directly beneath the hovering Dragonite. The massive Pokémon lowered its head, its large, dark eyes regarding him with a surprising gentleness. You've overstepped, Eva, Lance's voice echoed from the catwalk. The board may have sanctioned your division, but they will answer to me for this. This is my jurisdiction now. He turned his back on her, a clear dismissal, and walked toward the edge of the catwalk. With an effortless leap, he landed on Dragonite's back behind Ash. Hold on tight, he said, his voice a low rumble in Ash's ear. With a powerful downbeat of its wings, Dragonite ascended, carrying them up and out of the ruined radio tower, leaving behind a stunned and furious Commander Rostova and her squad of thwarted soldiers. They flew into the cool night sky, the neon lights of Goldenrod shrinking below them, and banked east, toward the dark, imposing silhouette of the mountains. The air in the dragon's den was cool and damp, filled with the gentle sound of trickling water and the faint, powerful hum of draconic energy. It was a sacred, hidden place, a vast cavern behind a waterfall near Blackthorn City, its walls glittering with raw Dratini crystals. Lance led Ash to a secluded chamber, where a simple fire was already burning. He had laid Sabrina down on a cot of soft furs, where she still slept, her breathing deep and even. Lance handed Ash a steaming mug. It was a bitter, herbal tea, but it was hot, and the warmth spread through Ash's chilled body. He sat on a rock by the fire, Pikachu curled at his feet, finally allowing the exhaustion to wash over him. She expended an incredible amount of energy, Lance said, his voice now quiet and conversational as he stared into the flames. I'm not surprised she's still unconscious. To broadcast a psychic signature of that magnitude, it's unheard of. Ash took a sip of the tea. She didn't have a choice. They had us. He looked at the champion, the question burning in his mind. Why did you come? You could have just ignored it. Lance turned his gaze from the fire to Ash. His eyes, in the flickering light, held a deep, weary wisdom. I am the champion. That title means more than just being the strongest trainer. It means I am the final line of defense. Not just against criminals, but against complications. The world is bigger and stranger than most people know, Ash. There are forces at play that the standard Pokémon League rulebook doesn't cover. He leaned forward, his expression serious. The Aegis Division is one of those complications. It was formed by a paranoid, hawkish faction on the League's board of directors after the incident with Mutwo in Kanto. They believe any power that cannot be quantified and controlled must be eliminated. They operate in the shadows, with a mandate that is dangerously broad. Commander Rostova is their most fervent believer. She sees anomalies everywhere. And we're an anomaly, Ash finished, the pieces clicking into place. The greatest one she's ever seen, Lance confirmed with a grim nod. A bond like yours, it's the stuff of legends. Literally. There are ancient texts that speak of synchronicity, of a human and a psychic so perfectly attuned they could rival the gods. Most dismissed them as myths. You've made them real. And that terrifies people like Rostova. A soft groan came from the cot. Sabrina was stirring. Ash was on his feet in an instant, crossing to her side. He knelt, taking her hand. It was warmer now. Her eyes fluttered open. They were hazy at first, then focused on Ash's face. A wave of profound relief washed from her, a gentle tide in the back of his mind. You're safe. We're safe, he sent back, squeezing her hand. She pushed herself into a sitting position, her eyes finding Lance. Fear flickered across her face, a reflexive response to a figure of authority. It's okay, Ash assured her. He helped us. Lance approached, keeping a respectful distance. He bowed his head slightly to Sabrina. I apologize for the actions of my league. Commander Rostova acted on an authority she believes to be absolute. I am here to tell you it is not. Sabrina watched him, her psychic senses probing, feeling the truth in his words, the integrity of his character. Ash felt her tension ease. The problem, Lance continued, his tone becoming that of a strategist laying out a battlefield, is political. Rostova has the backing of powerful board members. If I openly defy them and declare you innocent, it could fracture the league. Create a power struggle. In the chaos, you would be even more vulnerable. So we're still fugitives, Ash said, his heart sinking. Officially, yes, Lance conceded. Unofficially, you're my agents. Ash and Sabrina exchanged a startled look. Rostova is a symptom of a problem, not the cause, Lance explained. The real threat is the one you've been running from. This silent god. Your psychic message was filled with its presence, a cold, parasitic entity. Rostova and her board are afraid of the unknown. I need to give them a known. A quantifiable, undeniable threat that is bigger and more dangerous than you are. He looked them both in the eyes, his expression deadly serious. I need you to find me proof. Concrete, undeniable proof of this entity and the cult that serves it. Something I can take to the entire league, something so big that it forces Rostova's hand and unites us against the real enemy. I can't move officially, but I can provide you with resources. Information. Sanctuary. You will be my eyes and ears in the shadows. It was a dangerous bargain. He wasn't offering them freedom. He was offering them a mission. A way to fight back, not just for themselves, but for everyone. It was a chance to turn their curse into a cause. Ash didn't even have to look at Sabrina. He felt her decision align perfectly with his own. A shared, steely resolve. What do you need us to do? Ash asked. A rare, grim smile touched Lance's lips. He respected their immediate acceptance, their lack of hesitation. For now, you rest. You recover. My sources are already tracking the psychic disturbance left by Lucien's departure from Ikrutik. He walked over to a communications console set up in the corner of the cavern. He tapped a few keys, and a map of Jado appeared on the screen, a blinking red light marking a location. He's a zealot, Lance said, his eyes on the screen. His faith was shaken when you defeated him. He will likely do something drastic to prove his devotion and regain his god's favor. He'll seek out a place of great power to perform a ritual, to make a grand gesture. The blinking red light was pulsing over a large body of water in the northern part of Jado. The Lake of Rage. My Dragonite will take you there when you are ready, Lance said, turning back to them. He handed Ash a small, encrypted communicator. This will give you a direct, secure line to me. No one, not even Aegis, can trace it. Use it if you find something. Or if you need an exit. The path forward was clear. They were no longer running. They were hunting. Their enemy had a name and, now, a location. As Lance left them to rest, Ash looked at Sabrina. The fear and exhaustion were gone from her face, replaced by a quiet, fierce determination that mirrored his own. The world was still against them, but for the first time, they had an ally. They had a mission. And they had each other. The bond between them felt stronger than ever, a silent promise in the heart of the dragon's Denver. They would not fail. Chapter 7, The crimson tide. The air over the Lake of Rage was unnaturally still. The usual mist that clung to the water's surface was gone, and the lake itself was like a sheet of polished obsidian, its dark surface reflecting the overcast sky with a perfect, dead clarity. There were no ripples. No birds skimmed the surface. Even the ever-present chorus of lakeside Pokémon was silenced. It was a profound, unnatural quiet that was more unsettling than any storm. Lance's Dragonite set them down in a secluded grove of pine trees on the western shore, the massive Pokémon giving a low, concerned rumble before it took flight, vanishing back into the gray clouds. The moment its presence was gone, the oppressive stillness of the place rushed in to fill the void. Something is wrong, Ash said, his voice a low murmur. He could feel it in his bones, a deep-seated wrongness that made the hair on his arms stand up. Pikachu, perched on his shoulder, pressed close to his neck, his body tense. Sabrina stood beside him, her eyes closed, her brow furrowed in concentration. The psychic landscape was just as dead as the physical one. It's not silent, she projected, her mental voice tight with strain. It's suppressed. Muffled. Like a scream being held behind a thick wall. All the natural life, the energy of the lake, it's being smothered. She opened her eyes, her gaze drawn to the center of the lake. Out there. That's the source. They moved cautiously along the shoreline, using the thick foliage as cover. The infamous red Gyarados was there, but it wasn't the raging, magnificent beast of legend. It was thrashing in the water, its long, serpentine body coiling and uncoiling in frantic, uncontrolled spasms. Its crimson scales, usually a symbol of its defiant power, seemed dull under the flat light. It wasn't attacking anything. Its head would rear back, its mouth open in a silent roar of agony, before it slammed its own body against the surface of the lake, sending up huge, soundless plumes of water. It was in torment. And at the very center of that torment, the nexus of the entire suffocating phenomenon, was Lucien. He was standing on the water's surface as if it were solid ground, his arms outstretched, his head thrown back. A vortex of shimmering, distorted air swirled around him, drawing power from the sky, the water, and most of all, from the tortured psychic energy of the red Gyarados. He was a living conduit, a focal point for a massive, horrific ritual. The silent scream Sabrina had felt was the Gyarados' agony, being siphoned and refined. He's not just trying to prove his faith, Sabrina's thought was a horrified whisper in Ash's mind. He's using the rage of a legendary Pokémon as a catalyst. He's trying to tear a hole in reality. He's going to create a stable, physical rift for the silent god to manifest. This was no longer about a personal battle or evading capture. This was a regional catastrophe in the making. If that thing from their nightmares gained a physical foothold in their world, everything would be consumed by its silent, empty hunger. "We have to stop him," Ash said, his voice a hard, grim line. His hand went to the secure communicator Lance had given him. He had to warn him. But before he could activate it, a new sound intruded on the dead silence. The high-pitched whine. Ash and Sabrina flinched, the sound a Pavlovian trigger for pain and panic. On the opposite shore, a half-dozen black, angular boats were cutting through the water, converging on the center of the lake. On the shore behind them, squads of Aegis soldiers were deploying, their black uniforms stark against the muted landscape. At the head of the lead boat, standing impassively with her arms crossed, was Commander Eva Rostova. Her technology had likely picked up the same massive energy signature that had drawn Lance's attention. But she wasn't here to save the world. She was here to capture an anomaly. Her gaze was fixed on Lucien, the epicenter of the disturbance. To her, he was just a more powerful version of them. "They don't understand what they're dealing with," Ash gritted out, shoving the communicator back into his pocket. There was no time. Rostova's interference would complicate everything. "They're sonic dampeners, they won't work against this," Sabrina said, her eyes wide with a terrifying understanding. "Lucien isn't just using his own psychic power anymore. He's channeling something else. Something ancient and cosmic. Their technology is like trying to stop a tsunami with a paper fan." As if to prove her point, Rostova gave a signal. The emitters on the Aegis boats flared to life, sending focused beams of sonic energy directly at Lucien. The effect was instantaneous and disastrous. The moment the sonic waves hit the swirling vortex around Lucien, they were not absorbed or repelled. They were devoured. The vortex flared, the raw energy of the sound waves feeding it, making it stronger. Lucien cried out, but it was a sound of ecstasy, not pain. The sky above him, which had been a flat gray, began to darken, swirling into a deep, bruised purple. The water of the lake began to churn, no longer silent, but boiling with a corrupt, violet energy. The rift was opening. Rostova's boat was rocked by the suddenly violent waves. She stared at the escalating phenomenon, her analytical mind finally confronting a reality that didn't fit her neat, orderly parameters. For the first time, Ash saw a flicker of uncertainty, of something that might have been fear, on her face. "Forget her. We have to stop Lucien." Ash yelled over the rising wind. The situation had devolved into three-way chaos. Aegis, Lucien, and them. And we have to help that Garridos. It's the power source. We can't fight both. Sabrina cried back, the wind whipping her hair across her face. "We have to." Ash countered, his mind racing, formulating a desperate, insane plan. The principles were the same as their training. Divert, disable, strike. Only now, the scale was monumental. You handle Lucien's mind. Get through to him. I'll handle the hardware. It was a terrifying risk. For her to engage Lucien's mind now meant opening herself up to the full, focused power of the silent god he was channeling. But Ash felt her immediate agreement, a surge of trust and resolve that strengthened his own. "Pikachu, you're with me!" Ash yelled. He broke from the cover of the trees, sprinting down the muddy bank and diving headfirst into the churning, supernaturally cold water. The shock was immense, but the adrenaline surging through him burned away the cold. He struck out, swimming with powerful, desperate strokes toward the tormented red Garridos. Pikachu, clinging to his back, was a warm, solid weight, a beacon of shared courage. Sabrina remained on the shore. She sank to her knees, closing her eyes, her face pale as she braced herself for the psychic battle to come. She reached out with her consciousness, not with a physical force, but as a needle of pure thought, aiming for the heart of the storm, for the mind of Lucien. Ash swam, his muscles screaming in protest. The waves were chaotic, imbued with the corrupt energy of the rift. He could see Rostova and her soldiers trying to fall back, their advanced boat struggling against the unnatural currents. Their technology had failed them, and they were now caught in the very disaster they had helped escalate. A part of him felt a grim satisfaction, but he pushed it aside. He had a more important target. He reached the Garridos. The colossal creature was blind with agony, its red eyes rolled back in its head. It was so lost in its psychic torment that it didn't even notice him. Ash hauled himself up onto its broad, slick back, clinging on as the creature thrashed. "Hey! Big guy! Listen to me!" Ash yelled, his voice raw. "You have to fight him. He's using you. Don't let him take your anger." The Garridos didn't respond. It was trapped in a nightmare. Ash knew he couldn't get through with just words. He had to connect with it. Like he had with Sabrina. He placed his hands flat on the creature's crimson scales, closed his eyes, and pushed. He didn't use psychic power. He used his own spirit. He projected his own memories of rage, the fury he'd felt when his Pokémon were hurt, the anger at injustice, the defiant roar he'd given the flock of Spearow all those years ago. He showed the Garridos that rage didn't have to be a source of pain. It could be a source of strength. A tool for protection. He offered the Garridos not calm, but focus. Meanwhile, in a dimension of pure thought, Sabrina plunged into the heart of the storm. She found Lucien's consciousness, no longer a distinct entity, but a maelstrom of terrified awe and borrowed power. The silent god was all around her, its immense, cold presence pressing in, trying to consume her as it had in her. Nightmares. But she was not the same girl who had cowered in the void. Ash's warmth, his unwavering belief in her, was a shield around her soul. She ignored the god. She focused on the man. She didn't attack him. She didn't try to overpower him. She did what Ash had done for her in the Saffron Gym. She showed him the truth. She opened her mind, her memories, her very soul to him. She showed him the crushing, absolute loneliness of her childhood prison, the purity he so desperately craved. She showed him the terror of being a puppet for her father's ambition. Then, she showed him the other side. The warmth of a shared smile over a sunset. The feeling of Ash's hand in hers as they ran through the streets of Saffron. The breathtaking unity of their synchronized minds as they defeated the golem. The simple, profound joy of connection. Finally, she pulled a memory from Ash, from their bond. The memory of the storm, of a boy willing to sacrifice everything for a single, stubborn Pokémon. A display of loyalty so pure, so irrational, that it defied all of Lucien's cold logic. "This is strength, Lucien," she screamed into his mind. "This is power. Not the empty silence you serve. Your God offers you nothing. It just takes." The truth, a weapon far more potent than any psychic blast, slammed into him. For the first time, Lucien saw the gospel for what it was, a lie. A cosmic parasite had found a lonely, power-hungry boy and promised him transcendence, all while hollowing him out, turning him into a key to unlock its prison. His God did not love him. It was consuming him. On the lake, a change occurred. The red Garridos' thrashing lessened. Its eyes, still wild, focused for the first time on Ash. It felt his intent, the shared rage, the offer of focus. A deep, guttural roar echoed across the lake, no longer a sound of pain, but of pure, focused fury. It understood. The enemy was not the boy on its back. It was the man on the water. In the vortex, Lucien faltered. Sabrina's mental assault, her radical act of empathy, had broken his concentration. The flow of power from the Garridos to the rift wavered. The silent god, feeling its connection weaken, reacted with a surge of raw, malevolent power, trying to reassert control over its puppet. But it was too late. The chain was broken. The Garridos, now master of its own rage, turned its fury on the true source of its pain. It opened its mouth, and a beam of incandescent energy, a hyperbeam of monumental proportions, shot across the water. It wasn't aimed at Lucien. It was aimed at the swirling purple rift above his head. Simultaneously, Lucien, his face a mask of horrified realization as he saw the truth of his servitude, screamed in defiance. He severed his own connection, a final act of rebellion, turning his back on the god that had betrayed him. The ritual collapsed. The hyperbeam struck the unstable rift. The vortex imploded with a sound that was the opposite of an explosion, a deafening inrush of air and energy. The purple sky snapped back to a dull gray. The churning, corrupt water calmed in an instant. The oppressive psychic silence lifted, and the natural sounds of the lake rushed back in, the chirping of insects, the distant cry of a bird. Lucien, his power gone, his connection severed, fell into the water like a stone. The battle was over. Ash, still on the back of the now calm Garridos, watched as one of the Aegis boats, its engines finally working, cautiously approached and pulled the sputtering, broken form of Lucien from the water. Commander Rostova stood at the bow, her helmet off, staring not at her new prisoner, but at Ash. Her expression was a complex mixture of disbelief, frustration, and a grudging, undeniable respect. She had come to capture a monster and had instead witnessed that monster save the region from a threat her own advanced technology had only made worse. The red Garridos gave a low, rumbling sound of gratitude to Ash before it submerged, vanishing into the deep, leaving him treading water. Sabrina was there on the shore, waiting for him. As he waded out of the lake, soaked and exhausted, she met him at the water's edge. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. He could feel her relief, her pride, and the deep, bone-weary exhaustion that matched his own. They had done it. They had stopped the ritual. They had saved their rival. They had shown the Aegis division the truth of the real threat. But as they looked out over the now peaceful lake, a new, far more terrifying chill washed over them. It was a feeling that came from the bond itself, from the psychic ether. The rift was sealed, but a scar remained on the fabric of reality. And through that scar, they could feel an intelligence. An immeasurable will. The silent god was no longer just a passive, hungry entity. It was now fully, consciously aware of them. It knew their names. It knew the nature of their bond. It had felt the full, combined force of their will, an emotional, spiritual power that could not only resist it, but actively harm its influence. The hunt was no longer subtle. The games were over. The full, undivided attention of a parasitic god was now focused directly upon them. Chapter 8, The Unbreakable Bond. The world did not end in fire and thunder. It began to end with a hush. It started at the peak of Silver, the highest, most sacred point in both Kanto and Johto. A place of pilgrimage for only the most powerful trainers, a mountain wreathed in perpetual blizzards and legends. From its summit, a zone of absolute psychic silence began to expand, a creeping, invisible deadness that rolled down the mountainside like a fog. Pokémon in the surrounding forests fell quiet, their instincts screaming at them to flee from a predator they could not see or smell. People in the towns at the mountain's base grew listless, their thoughts becoming sluggish, their emotions muted. Joy, anger, fear, they all faded into a gray, placid apathy. The silent god's final gambit was not a violent invasion. It was a hostile takeover of consciousness itself. It was not opening a rift to let itself in, it was pulling their reality into its own silent, empty domain. Lance's Dragonite found them on the road from the Lake of Rage, the urgency of its arrival a stark contrast to its usual calm demeanor. The message from the champion was grim and immediate, the phenomenon was spreading, and at its center was a psychic void so complete it was visible on their most sensitive instruments as a hole in the world. He didn't need to tell them what it was. They could already feel it at the distant edges of their bond, a cold, encroaching numbness. They flew toward Silver, the ground below them transforming as they drew closer. The vibrant greens of the forest faded to a dull, listless gray. They saw herds of Pokémon standing motionless, their heads bowed, as if waiting for a command that would never come. It was a world being put to sleep. They landed at a hastily assembled forward base camp just below the snow line, where the silence became a palpable pressure. Tents flapped in the frigid wind, and League personnel moved with a sluggish, robotic slowness. Lance met them, his face etched with grim fatigue. But beside him, an unexpected figure stood waiting. Commander Eva Rostova. Her black Aegis uniform seemed out of place among the standard League parkas. Her arms were crossed, her expression stern, but the arrogant certainty she had worn in Goldenrod was gone, replaced by a weary pragmatism. She had seen the truth at the Lake of Rage. Her worldview had been shattered, and she had been forced to rebuild it around a new, terrifying reality. "Catch 'em." "Sabrina," she said, her voice clipped, foregoing any apology. "Champion Lance has updated my operational parameters. The entity you warned us about is the prime threat. My division is now tasked with containment of the physical phenomenon." She gestured to the mountain. "We're establishing a perimeter, evacuating civilians. But our technology is useless against the source. We can only manage the symptoms. The disease, that's you." It wasn't an alliance born of friendship. It was a desperate, temporary truce born of necessity. She was a woman of logic, and the logic was undeniable. Ash and Sabrina were the only ones who had ever stood against this thing and won. "It's not trying to break through anymore," Sabrina said, her voice low, her gaze fixed on the snow-swept peak above them. The air here was thin, but the psychic pressure was immense. She was leaning on Ash for support, the numbness seeping into the edges of their bond. "It's pulling. It's tired of playing games. It wants to bring us into its realm. All of us. Can you fight it?" Lance asked, the question heavy with the fate of two regions. Ash looked at Sabrina. He saw the strain on her face, but beneath it, a familiar, unshakable resolve. He felt it in his own heart, a defiant fire against the encroaching cold. Their journey, their training, their battles, it had all led to this. They were not the same two people who had collided in the Saffron Gym. They were a single, unified force. "We can," Ash said, his voice ringing with a certainty that cut through the apathy-inducing air. "But not from here. We have to go to the source. We have to let it pull us in." Rostova's eyes widened slightly. "You want to walk into the heart of that void? That's suicide." "No," Sabrina corrected, her voice gaining strength as Ash's resolve flowed into her through the bond. "It's the only way to fight it on our terms. On its home ground." There was no more to be said. Rostova and Lance would hold the line in the physical world, fighting a losing battle against the encroaching silence. Ash and Sabrina had to fight the metaphysical war. They ascended the final, treacherous path to the summit of Mt. Silver alone. The wind howled, tearing at them, but it was nothing compared to the psychic vortex they were walking into. The silence was a physical weight, pressing in, trying to scour their minds clean. They walked hand in hand, their bond the only thing keeping them whole. It was a blazing filament of connection in a universe of absolute zero. They shared every ounce of warmth, every memory, every feeling, a bulwark against the great nothing. At the very peak of the mountain, the world ended. The snow, the rocks, the sky, it all dissolved into a seamless, starless, pitch-black void. One moment they were on a mountain. The next, they were floating in the heart of the silent god. This was its realm. The cold was absolute. The silence was a presence, a malevolent consciousness the size of a universe. It was the same void from Sabrina's nightmares, but now, they were not dreaming. They were here. A voice, not of sound, but of pure, distilled thought, filled their minds. It was ancient, passionless, and infinitely weary. "You have resisted. You have made noise in my house. It is time for silence." Before them, the void coalesced, taking a form they could comprehend. It became a mirror of Sabrina. A perfect, serene version of her, floating on a black throne, just as she had been in the saffron gym. But her eyes were empty, two pits of blackness that held the emptiness of dead galaxies. Is this not what you craved, little godling? The entity spoke, using the image of Sabrina as its mouthpiece. Perfect isolation. Absolute power. No more noise. No more pain. Rejoin me. Become pure again. Cast him aside, it was a temptation aimed at the deepest, most wounded part of her. The promise of her old prison, reframed as a paradise. Ash felt a flicker of her old fear, the reflexive pull of that familiar solitude. But he also felt her new strength. She squeezed his hand in the void, her grip like iron. No, Sabrina's voice, her real voice, rang out in their shared consciousness. My prison wasn't the noise. It was the silence. It was you. The false Sabrina's face twisted in a flicker of annoyance. The throne dissolved, and the entity shifted its attack. It turned to Ash. The void around him changed, transforming into a perfect replica of Pallet Town. The sun was warm on his face. He could smell his mother's garden. Pikachu, a younger, chubbier version of himself, scampered at his feet. His old life, simple and bright, stretched before him. And you, little anchor. Little spark of chaos, the voice was a soothing balm. You never asked for this. This burden. This war. Let it go. Return. Be a boy again. Battle for badges. Live your small, happy life. She is not your responsibility. Leave her to her destiny. And be free, it was the most insidious temptation of all. A return to normalcy. A life where the fate of the world didn't rest on his shoulders. Ash felt the pull of it, the siren song of a simpler time. For a moment, his resolve wavered. Then he felt Sabrina's terror. Her fear, not of the god, but of being left alone again. That single, pure feeling cut through the illusion like a knife. He looked at the phantom of Pallet Town, at the empty promise of a life without her. And he knew, with a clarity that dwarfed the power of the god before them, that it was a hollow thing. That life was in the past. His future, his reality, was the girl whose hand was clasped in his. You don't get it, Ash's voice was a low growl, but in the silence of the void, it was a thunderclap. He shattered the illusion with the force of his own will. They were back in the endless black. Our bond isn't a burden. It's not a chain. It's our greatest strength. It's the one thing you'll never have. The entity recoiled, its form dissolving. It had tried to divide them. It had failed. The concept of their unity was something it could not comprehend. A bond is a flaw. An impurity. It will be unmade, the final battle began. The void itself became their enemy. Waves of pure nihilism washed over them, attempting to snuff out their consciousness. Memories were torn from them, the threads of their past pulled and frayed. The god was trying to erase them, to reduce them to the same silent nothingness as itself. But their bond was a two-way street. A self-sustaining engine. Ash became the generator. He was no longer just an anchor. He was a furnace of pure, unadulterated life. He poured everything he was into the bond, his stubbornness, his love for his Pokémon, the joy of a hard-won battle, the pain of loss, the simple, defiant act of drawing breath. He was the living, breathing, chaotic antithesis of everything the silent god represented. He was the noise. Sabrina became the lens. She was no longer just a psychic shield. She took the raw, chaotic, beautiful energy pouring from Ash and focused it. Her immense psychic power, disciplined by her training and guided by his tactical mind, became a scalpel. She took his hope and forged it into a spear. She took his love and honed it into a shield. She was the weapon that could translate the abstract power of a human soul into something that could harm a god. They didn't just defend. They attacked. They pushed back, not with energy blasts, but with feelings. With life itself. They flooded the void with the taste of Brock's stew. With the feeling of Pidgeot's wings catching the wind. With the heart-stopping terror and elation of the magnet train escape. With the quiet pride of watching a caterpie evolve. With the sting of Misty's insults and the warmth of her friendship. They slammed the entity with the pure, unwavering loyalty of Pikachu. They drowned it in the silent, profound understanding of two souls who had become one. It was a symphony of life directed at a being of absolute death. The silent god, a creature that had only ever known hunger and emptiness, was being force-fed an infinity of sensation. It was a poison it could not digest. The void began to fracture. Cracks of brilliant, colorful light spread through the oppressive blackness. The god shrieked, a soundless, mental cry of pure agony. It had consumed psychic energy for eons, but this fusion of emotion, will, and spirit, was utterly alien. It was being overloaded, its very nature corroded by the vibrant, messy reality of life. Impossible, it roared. This noise. This pain, this is what it means to be alive. Ash and Sabrina shouted in unison, their thought a singular, triumphant cry. With one final, unified push, they unleashed the core of their bond, the memory of the moment it was forged. The chaotic, painful, beautiful collision in the saffron gym. The desperation, the fear, the yearning for connection, and the unexpected spark of something new. It was the genesis of their power, and they turned it into the ultimate weapon. The blast of pure, emotional reality struck the core of the silent god. It didn't destroy the entity. It violently, absolutely expelled it. The god's connection to their plane of existence, the psychic wound it had festered in for millennia, was cauterized by the sheer, overwhelming force of their shared soul. They severed it from their dimension, casting it back into the silent, starless void from which it came, alone and unreachable. The blackness shattered into a billion points of light. Ash gasped, his eyes flying open. The first thing he felt was the biting cold of the wind. The first thing he saw was the brilliant, breathtaking light of the rising sun. They were on the peak of Silver, snow swirling around them. The psychic pressure was gone. The world was quiet, but it was a natural quiet, filled with the sound of the wind and the distant promise of a waking world. Sabrina was beside him, her hand still in his. She was breathing heavily, her face pale but her eyes shining with a light that rivaled the dawn. The noise in their heads, the constant hum of the bond, was gone. It had been replaced by something far deeper. A silent, perfect understanding. They no longer needed to share thoughts to know what the other was feeling. They just knew. Below them, the gray, listless fog was receding from the mountainside, life and color bleeding back into the world as the sun's rays touched it. A short distance away, Commander Rostova stood with lance, a pair of binoculars lowered from her eyes. Her Aegis soldiers were standing down, their expressions a mixture of awe and confusion. Rostova's face was unreadable, but as her gaze met Ash's, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was an admission of defeat, an acknowledgement of a power beyond her comprehension, and a gesture of grudging respect. In Lance's custody, Lucien would face not a prison, but rehabilitation, his testimony the final, undeniable proof Lance needed to dismantle the paranoid faction that had given Rostova her power. The world would never know the full truth of what happened on the peak of Silver, but they would know that something terrible had been averted. Ash looked at Sabrina. The dawn light caught in her dark hair, and for the first time, he saw not a psychic, not a partner, not a weapon, but just her. And she saw just him. There were no grand declarations of love, no dramatic confessions. There didn't need to be. Their entire journey, from a shattered gym to the heart of a dead god, had been the ultimate declaration. Their shared soul was a testament stronger than any words. He smiled, a tired, genuine smile. She smiled back, a brilliant, beautiful thing that promised a new beginning. They were no longer just a trainer and a gym leader. They were something new, a symbol of a connection that had defied logic, hunted monsters, and dethroned a god. The path ahead was uncertain. The world would have questions. But as they stood together, side by side on the roof of the world, they knew they would face it all together. They turned, and hand in hand, walked toward the rising sun. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.